In the 40th millennium, before the catastrophic civil war that would transform its surface into an irradiated wasteland, Krieg stood as one of the Imperium's most productive and strategically vital manufacturing worlds. Located within the Segmentum Solar, the same stellar region that housed Holy Terra itself, Krieg occupied a position of tremendous importance in the Imperial war machine's supply chains. The planet's proximity to the throne world and its location along major warp routes made it an indispensable hub for military production and logistics operations that sustained countless Imperial campaigns across the galaxy. The world's surface bore the unmistakable marks of millennia of industrial exploitation. Massive hive cities stretched toward polluted skies, their towering spires disappearing into perpetual smog clouds that blanketed the planet. These urban monuments to Imperial industry housed billions of workers whose lives revolved entirely around the endless cycle of production demanded by the Emperor's war efforts. The largest of these settlements, Hive Fairgrad, dominated the northern continent with its sprawling manufactorum complexes and residential blocks that extended deep into the planet's crust. From orbit, the Hive appeared as a cancerous growth of metal and rockcrete, its surface bristling with smokestacks, cooling towers, and the skeletal frameworks of cargo lifters that transported finished goods to orbital stations. Krieg's industrial capacity defied easy comprehension. The planet's foundries operated continuously, their forges never cooling, as they transformed raw materials into the instruments of war that Imperial forces required. Entire districts within each Hive city specialized in specific types of production. The munitorium sectors churned out millions of rounds of ammunition daily, from standard lasgun power cells to specialized ordnance for heavy artillery pieces. The sounds of these facilities created a constant industrial symphony that echoed through the Hive's corridors, the rhythmic hammering of automated presses, the hiss of cooling metals, and the mechanical grinding of assembly lines that never ceased their work. Vehicle production represented another cornerstone of Krieg's economic output. The planet's manufactorums produced Leman Russ battle tanks, Chimera armored personnel carriers, and countless variants of Imperial Guard vehicles that would serve on battlefields across the galaxy. These facilities required enormous spaces within the Hives, their assembly floors stretching for kilometers as partially completed vehicles moved along production lines operated by teams of skilled tech adepts and indentured workers. The quality of Krieg's vehicle production earned recognition throughout the Segmentum Solar, with many Imperial commanders specifically requesting equipment bearing the planet's manufacturing stamps. The weapons foundries of Krieg supplied not only individual armaments, but also the massive artillery pieces that defined Imperial Guard doctrine. These workshops produced Earthshaker cannons, basilisk self-propelled guns, and the specialized siege equipment that Imperial forces employed in their endless campaigns of conquest and defense. The planet's artisans had developed particular expertise in creating durable, reliable weapons that could function in the harshest battlefield conditions. This reputation for quality manufacturing extended to personal equipment as well, with Krieg pattern lasguns, flak armor, and field equipment becoming standard issue for numerous Imperial Guard regiments throughout the sector. Beyond finished military hardware, Krieg served as a crucial supplier of raw materials and components that fed into the broader Imperial manufacturing network. The planet's deep mines extracted vast quantities of metal ores, rare earth elements, and industrial chemicals that were processed in surface refineries before shipment to other worlds. These mining operations extended far beneath the Hive cities, creating a subterranean landscape of tunnels, processing facilities, and worker habitations that mirrored the surface settlements in their scale and complexity. The miners who labored in these depths formed a distinct class within Krieg's social hierarchy, their lives shaped by the dangerous work of extracting the materials that fueled the planet's industrial output. The governance of this industrial powerhouse rested in the hands of a planetary nobility that had accumulated tremendous wealth and influence through their control of manufacturing operations. These noble houses operated as feudal overlords of industry, each controlling specific sectors of production and maintaining private armies of security forces to protect their interests. The most powerful among them sat on the Planetary Council, which served as the world's primary governing body under the overall authority of the Imperial Governor. This system created a complex web of alliances, rivalries, and commercial relationships that determined how resources were allocated and production priorities were established. House Jurten commanded the largest share of vehicle manufacturing, their foundries producing nearly 40% of Krieg's armored vehicle output. The family's patriarch, Lord Commander Jurten, had built his power base through strategic marriages with other noble houses and careful cultivation of relationships with off-world imperial officials. His manufactorums employed hundreds of thousands of workers and maintained exclusive contracts with several Space Marine chapters for specialized vehicle variants. The House's private security forces were equipped with military-grade weapons and vehicles, making them a formidable power within the planet's political landscape. House Voss controlled much of Krieg's ammunition production, operating vast complexes that supplied ordnance to Imperial forces throughout the Segmentum Solar. Their facilities specialized in exotic ammunition types, including specialized shells for Space Marine weapons and custom ordnance for particular campaign requirements. Lady Voss, the House's current leader, had earned recognition from the Adeptus Mechanicus for her innovations in ammunition design and production efficiency. Her political influence extended beyond Krieg itself, with connections to Munitorium officials on Terra who relied on her facilities to meet critical supply requirements. The mining operations that provided raw materials for surface manufacturing fell under the control of House Kastner, whose underground domain encompassed thousands of kilometers of tunnels and extraction sites. Lord Kastner maintained his own private army of tunnel fighters, who served both as security forces and specialized military units capable of underground warfare. The House's wealth derived not only from mining operations, but also from their control of the transportation networks that moved raw materials from the depths to surface processing facilities. Smaller noble houses controlled specialized aspects of Krieg's industrial output. House Meridian operated the planet's primary chemical processing facilities, producing the industrial compounds and specialized materials required for advanced manufacturing processes. House Corvanis managed much of the planet's food production, operating vast hydroponic facilities and protein synthesis plants that fed the billions of workers who sustained the industrial machine. House Draconis controlled significant portions of the weapons manufacturing sector, their foundries producing the personal armaments that equipped Imperial Guard forces across multiple sectors. The social structure beneath the nobility consisted of multiple distinct classes, each with defined roles in maintaining the planet's industrial output. The Tech Adepts represented the highest tier of non-noble society, their expertise in maintaining and operating complex manufacturing equipment, making them indispensable to continued production. These servants of the Omnissiah maintained close relationships with the noble houses while preserving their loyalty to Mars and the broader Adeptus Mechanicus. Their workshops and laboratories occupied privileged positions within the Hive cities, and their recommendations carried significant weight in decisions regarding production methods and equipment upgrades. Skilled workers formed the backbone of Krieg's manufacturing operations. These individuals possessed specialized knowledge in operating specific types of equipment, maintaining quality control standards, and training new workers in complex production processes. They lived in dedicated residential sectors within the hives, their quarters modest but significantly better than those provided to general laborers. Many skilled workers belonged to hereditary guilds that maintained traditional manufacturing techniques and served as intermediaries between the nobility and the broader worker population. The vast majority of Krieg's population consisted of general laborers whose lives revolved entirely around their assigned production duties. These workers lived in cramped hab blocks deep within the hive cities, their daily routines dictated by shift schedules that maximized manufacturing output. Despite their numbers, they possessed little political influence and depended entirely on the noble houses for employment, housing, and basic necessities. The constant demand for increased production meant that working conditions remained harsh, with safety considerations often secondary to meeting quotas and deadlines. Krieg's integration into the broader imperial economy extended far beyond simple manufacturing output. The planet served as a crucial logistics hub for military campaigns throughout the segmentum solar, its orbital facilities capable of loading and dispatching massive supply convoys to active war zones. Imperial Navy vessels regularly visited Krieg's orbital stations to collect ammunition, spare parts, and replacement equipment for ongoing operations. The planet's location along established warp routes made it an ideal staging point for supply operations supporting campaigns in neighboring sectors. The Adeptus Militarum maintained significant administrative facilities on Krieg, their bureaucrats working closely with planetary authorities to coordinate production schedules with military requirements. These officials possessed detailed knowledge of Imperial Guard deployment patterns and equipment needs, allowing them to direct Krieg's manufacturing capacity toward the most critical supply shortages. The relationship between Munitorum representatives and the noble houses involved constant negotiation over production priorities, delivery schedules, and quality standards that would determine the effectiveness of imperial forces in distant theaters of war. Trade relationships with other imperial worlds created additional economic opportunities for Krieg's ruling classes. The planet imported specialized materials that could not be produced locally, including rare metals required for advanced weapon systems and exotic compounds used in vehicle armor production. These trade agreements often involved complex arrangements that included technology transfers, manufacturing licenses, and exclusive supply contracts that bound Krieg's economy to the broader imperial industrial network. The corruption that would ultimately consume Krieg began not with dramatic proclamations of heresy or open displays of demonic power, but through subtle infiltration and gradual subversion of the planet's ruling elite. The chaos cults that took root among the noble houses operated with patience and cunning, understanding that a world of such strategic importance to the Imperium could not be turned through brute force alone. Instead, they employed the insidious methods that had proven effective on countless other worlds, appealing to existing ambitions, exploiting personal grievances, and offering forbidden knowledge to those who believed themselves deserving of greater power. The initial stages of corruption manifested through seemingly innocuous social gatherings among Krieg's aristocracy. Private salons hosted by various noble houses became venues for philosophical discussions that gradually shifted from acceptable topics of governance and economics toward more dangerous territories of imperial doctrine and the nature of authority itself. These conversations, carefully guided by individuals who had already embraced heretical beliefs, planted seeds of doubt about the Imperium's right to demand such enormous sacrifices from worlds like Krieg, while offering little in return beyond protection from external threats. House Voss became the primary vector for this ideological contamination. Lady Voss had grown increasingly resentful of munitorium demands that required her ammunition facilities to operate at maximum capacity while providing minimal compensation for the enormous resources consumed in production. Her frustration with imperial bureaucracy made her receptive to whispered suggestions that Krieg's noble houses deserved greater autonomy in determining how their world's industrial might should be employed. These conversations occurred during private meetings with off-world traders who claimed to represent alternative markets for military equipment, individuals who spoke persuasively about the benefits of independence from imperial oversight. The corruption spread through established networks of political alliance and commercial partnership that connected the major noble houses. Lord Kastner found himself drawn into discussions about the true nature of power and the arbitrary restrictions that imperial law placed on planetary governors. His mining operations had uncovered unusual mineral formations in the deepest excavations, crystalline structures that seemed to pulse with their own internal light and generated strange resonances when exposed to certain frequencies. The off-world advisors who had gained Lady Voss's confidence suggested that these discoveries represented opportunities for technological advancement that Imperial doctrine would never permit him to explore. House Meridian's involvement began through their chemical processing operations, where certain production runs had yielded unexpected compounds with properties that defied conventional understanding. The family's chief chemist reported substances that remained stable under conditions that should have caused immediate breakdown, and others that seemed to enhance the effectiveness of conventional explosives beyond theoretical limits. When these anomalies were reported to tech adept supervisors, the responses indicated that such discoveries should be suppressed rather than investigated, creating frustration among Meridian's technical staff who believed they were on the verge of revolutionary breakthroughs. The gradual transformation of these noble houses involved careful cultivation of their existing character flaws and ambitions. Lady Voss's pride in her technical innovations became twisted into contempt for imperial restrictions on weapons development. Lord Kastner's natural curiosity about the geological mysteries beneath his domain evolved into obsession with forbidden knowledge that promised to unlock the planet's hidden potential. House Meridian's scientific pursuits transformed into reckless experimentation with compounds that exhibited properties no loyal Imperial citizen should have been willing to investigate. Colonel Jerton, commander of the Planetary Defense Forces and heir to House Jerton's industrial empire, first became aware of the growing conspiracy through routine security briefings that revealed unusual patterns in off-world communications. His position provided access to intelligence reports that tracked the movement of personnel and materials between Krieg and other systems, data that revealed an increasing frequency of contact with worlds that had previously maintained minimal trade relationships with the planet. The timing of these communications coincided with private meetings among the noble houses, creating a pattern that suggested coordination with external influences. The Colonel's investigation began cautiously, using his authority over planetary security forces to monitor communications and track the activities of suspected individuals without alerting them to his suspicions. His agents reported strange deliveries to noble house compounds, shipments that arrived without proper documentation and were handled by personnel who refused to submit to standard security screenings. These materials were transported directly to private laboratories and workshops where they disappeared from official inventory systems, suggesting that the noble houses were conducting unauthorized research projects using unknown substances or technologies. Further investigation revealed that several key positions within the planetary government had been filled by individuals with questionable backgrounds and unexplained wealth. The new deputy governor, appointed through Lady Voss's influence, had arrived on Krieg with credentials that could not be verified through standard Imperial channels. His previous service record contained gaps that coincided with campaigns in sectors where Imperial forces had encountered significant chaos corruption. Similar patterns emerged among other recent appointments to critical administrative positions, creating a network of potentially compromised officials in positions where they could influence planetary policy and security protocols. Colonel Jerton's attempts to alert higher Imperial authorities met with frustration and bureaucratic obstruction that seemed deliberately designed to prevent his concerns from reaching appropriate officials. His reports to the Segmentum Solar command structure disappeared into administrative systems without generating responses or acknowledgments. Communications with the Adeptus Archives were redirected through planetary government channels, where they could be intercepted and suppressed by the same officials whose loyalty he questioned. Even his attempts to contact Space Marine chapters that maintained recruitment relationships with Krieg were blocked by communication protocols that required approval from planetary authorities. The systematic purging of loyal Imperial officers began with seemingly routine personnel transfers and administrative reorganizations that removed potential threats to the growing conspiracy. Colonel Jerton watched as competent commanders were reassigned to distant postings or transferred to units where their influence would be minimized. The official justifications for these moves cited efficiency improvements and strategic restructuring, but the pattern clearly targeted individuals who had demonstrated unwavering loyalty to Imperial doctrine and showed resistance to the subtle changes occurring within the planetary government. Major Korin, commander of the primary spaceport security forces, found himself transferred to a remote mining facility after questioning new protocols that reduced screening procedures for incoming vessels. His replacement, a recently arrived officer with impressive credentials but no verifiable service history, immediately implemented changes that allowed certain ships to bypass standard inspection procedures entirely. These vessels arrived at irregular intervals and departed quickly after unloading cargo that was transported directly to noble house facilities without passing through normal customs processing. Captain Vex, responsible for monitoring communications between Krieg and other Imperial worlds, was reassigned to training duties after reporting anomalies in message routing that suggested unauthorized interception of official correspondence. Her replacement proved remarkably incurious about communication irregularities and showed little interest in maintaining the security protocols that had previously protected sensitive military and administrative information from potential compromise. The installation of chaos-corrupted leadership accelerated as the conspiracy gained confidence and expanded its influence throughout the planetary government. New appointments consistently favored individuals who had demonstrated flexibility regarding Imperial regulations and showed willingness to prioritize planetary interests over broader Imperial concerns. These officials gradually modified existing policies and procedures in ways that appeared reasonable on the surface, but created opportunities for the corrupted noble houses to pursue their heretical agenda without interference from loyal Imperial servants. The Planetary Council underwent a transformation that reflected the shifting balance of power among Krieg's ruling elite. Traditional procedures for conducting official business were modified to allow for private sessions, where sensitive matters could be discussed without the presence of Imperial observers or recording devices. These closed meetings became venues for planning the planet's eventual separation from Imperial authority, with participants sharing intelligence about Imperial military deployments and discussing strategies for neutralizing potential resistance to their plans. Industrial production schedules were subtly altered to prioritize manufacturing projects that served the conspiracy's goals rather than legitimate Imperial requirements. Ammunition production shifted towards specialized ordnance types that incorporated the mysterious compounds discovered in House Meridian's laboratories, creating stockpiles of weapons with enhanced destructive capabilities that would prove crucial in the coming conflict. Vehicle manufacturing focused increasingly on variants designed for planetary defense rather than export to Imperial forces, building up military capabilities that could be turned against Imperial authority when the time came for open rebellion. The corruption extended beyond the noble houses into the broader administrative structure that governed Krieg's daily operations. Mid-level bureaucrats found themselves presented with opportunities for advancement and increased authority in exchange for their cooperation with new policies that gradually undermined Imperial oversight of planetary affairs. These officials were not necessarily aware of the ultimate goals of their new superiors, but their willingness to prioritize immediate benefits over adherence to established procedures made them unwitting accomplices in the growing conspiracy. Tech adepts who had previously maintained strict adherence to Mechanicus doctrine were gradually exposed to forbidden knowledge that promised revolutionary advances in manufacturing and weapons technology. The corrupted noble houses shared selected discoveries from their unauthorized research projects, demonstrating practical applications that seemed to validate heretical theories about the nature of technology and its relationship to human consciousness. These revelations created divisions within the tech priest community, with some individuals embracing the new possibilities, while others remained loyal to traditional Mechanicus teachings. The planetary defense forces experienced their own transformation as loyal officers were replaced by individuals who prioritized allegiance to Krieg's ruling elite over service to the broader Imperium. Training exercises shifted focus toward scenarios involving defense against Imperial intervention rather than external threats, preparing troops for the possibility of armed conflict with loyalist forces. Equipment requisitions emphasized weapons and vehicles suitable for urban warfare and siege operations, suggesting that the corrupted leadership anticipated fighting within Krieg's own hive cities. Security protocols throughout the planet were systematically weakened to allow the conspiracy greater freedom of operation while maintaining the appearance of normal Imperial governance. Surveillance systems that had previously monitored potential threats were reconfigured to focus on individuals who remained loyal to Imperial authority rather than those who posed actual security risks. Communication intercepts that had once protected against external infiltration were redirected to identify potential resistance to the growing rebellion among Krieg's own population. The Declaration of Independence from the Imperium emerged as the logical culmination of months of careful preparation and gradual corruption of planetary authority. The Planetary Council, now dominated by representatives of the corrupted noble houses, formally announced Krieg's withdrawal from Imperial jurisdiction during a closed session that excluded all remaining loyal officials. The declaration cited the Imperium's excessive demands on planetary resources and its failure to provide adequate compensation for Krieg's contributions to the Imperial war effort, presenting the rebellion as a justified response to Imperial exploitation rather than an act of heretical treachery. The alignment with the ruinous powers was revealed gradually, as the planet's new leadership demonstrated the enhanced capabilities that their forbidden research had produced. Public demonstrations of improved weapons and manufacturing techniques were presented as evidence of Krieg's technological superiority over Imperial methods, with the corrupted noble houses claiming that their innovations proved the planet's right to independence from Imperial oversight. The true source of these advances remained hidden from the general population, who were told that Krieg's scientists had simply achieved breakthroughs that Imperial doctrine had previously prevented them from pursuing. Colonel Jerton's discovery of the full extent of the conspiracy came through intercepted communications that revealed the Planetary Council's secret declaration of independence. His network of loyal intelligence operatives had managed to infiltrate the private communication channels used by the corrupted noble houses, providing him with irrefutable evidence that Krieg's leadership had committed acts of treason that demanded immediate action. The intercepted messages detailed plans for seizing control of orbital defense platforms, neutralizing remaining Imperial installations, and coordinating with off-world chaos forces that would provide military support for the rebellion. The colonel understood that conventional channels for reporting such treachery had been compromised beyond repair. His previous attempts to alert Imperial authorities had been systematically blocked, and the corrupted planetary government now controlled most communication systems that could reach off-world Imperial forces. The situation demanded immediate action using whatever loyal resources remained under his command, even though such action would inevitably trigger the civil war that the traitors had been preparing for months. Jerton's first priority involved securing the loyalty of Imperial Guard regiments stationed on Krieg before the traitors could move to neutralize them. The 83rd Krieg Armored Regiment remained under the command of Colonel Vance, an officer whose unwavering devotion to Imperial doctrine had made him a target for removal by the corrupted leadership. Jerton's agents reached Vance through secure channels, providing him with evidence of the conspiracy and coordinating plans for resistance operations. The 83rd controlled significant armored assets, including 2 full companies of Lehman Russ battle tanks and supporting Chimera transports that would prove essential in any armed confrontation with traitor forces. The 127th Krieg Infantry Regiment presented a more complex situation, as its command structure had been partially compromised through the appointment of new officers whose loyalty remained questionable. Major Kellner, the regiment's second in command, had maintained contact with Jerton's intelligence network and confirmed that several company commanders remained loyal to the Imperium despite pressure from their superiors to accept the new planetary government's authority. These officers controlled approximately 3,000 troops equipped with standard Imperial Guard weapons and equipment, representing a substantial force if properly coordinated with other loyalist elements. The planetary defense artillery units scattered throughout Krieg's major hive cities posed particular challenges for loyalist resistance efforts. These installations controlled massive earthshaker cannons and other heavy weapons capable of devastating urban areas, but their crews had been systematically replaced with personnel selected for their allegiance to the corrupted noble houses. Colonel Jerton's operatives identified several key installations where small groups of loyal artillerymen remained in subordinate positions, creating opportunities for sabotage operations that could deny these weapons to traitor forces. Jerton established his primary command center in the deep industrial sectors of Hive Fairgrad, utilizing maintenance tunnels and abandoned manufactorum complexes that provided concealment from traitor surveillance systems. These underground facilities offered access to communication networks that had not yet been compromised by the corrupted planetary government, allowing loyalist forces to coordinate their activities without immediate detection. The colonel's staff included intelligence specialists, communication technicians, and logistics officers who had maintained their loyalty to imperial authority despite months of pressure to accept the new regime. The initial phase of open conflict began when traitor forces attempted to seize control of the primary spaceport facility that served as Krieg's main connection to off-world Imperial forces. Colonel Jerton had anticipated this move and positioned elements of the 83rd Armored Regiment in concealed positions around the spaceport's perimeter, where they could respond quickly to any attempt at forcible occupation. The traitor assault force consisted of corrupted planetary defense troops supported by vehicles from noble house private armies, representing a significant military capability, but lacking the coordination and experience of regular Imperial Guard units. The battle for Fairgrad Spaceport demonstrated both the strengths and limitations of the hastily organized loyalist resistance. Colonel Vance's armored units struck the traitor forces during their initial approach, catching them in open terrain where the superior firepower and armor protection of Lehman Russ battle tanks provided decisive advantages. The Loyalist attack destroyed 12 traitor vehicles and scattered their infantry support, forcing them to retreat toward defensive positions in the surrounding industrial complexes. However, the victory came at significant cost, with the 83rd losing 3 tanks and suffering casualties that could not easily be replaced given their isolation from Imperial supply lines. The traitors' response revealed the extent of their preparation for armed conflict. Artillery strikes from corrupted defense installations began targeting known loyalist positions within hours of the spaceport battle, demonstrating that the corrupted leadership possessed detailed intelligence about resistance activities and the capability to coordinate complex military operations. These bombardments forced loyalist units to abandon several prepared positions and retreat deeper into the urban maze of Hive Fairgrad's industrial sectors, where the massive structures provided some protection from indirect fire. Major Kellner's infantry forces proved particularly effective in the urban warfare that characterized the early stages of the Civil War. His troops possessed intimate knowledge of Hive Fairgrad's layout, including maintenance passages, utility tunnels, and abandoned sections that could be used for concealment and rapid movement between defensive positions. The infantry established observation posts in strategic locations that provided intelligence about traitor troop movements while remaining hidden from enemy patrols. These positions also served as bases for sabotage operations against traitor supply lines and communication networks. The Loyalist forces quickly discovered that conventional military tactics offered limited effectiveness against an enemy that controlled the planet's primary industrial and administrative centers. The traitors possessed superior numbers, better access to supplies and reinforcements, and the ability to coordinate their operations through official government channels that remained beyond Loyalist reach. Direct confrontations consistently favored the traitor forces, who could concentrate overwhelming firepower against isolated loyalist units and replace their losses through recruitment from the corrupted planetary defense forces. Colonel Jerton adapted his strategy to emphasize guerrilla warfare tactics that exploited the loyalists' advantages in mobility, local knowledge, and dedication to their cause. Small teams of infantry specialists began conducting raids against traitor supply convoys, targeting vehicles transporting ammunition and fuel between noble house facilities and forward operating bases. These attacks relied on detailed intelligence about convoy routes and schedules, information provided by loyalist sympathizers who remained in positions within the traitor administration and transportation networks. The sabotage campaign against traitor infrastructure represented another crucial element of loyalist resistance strategy. Teams of specialists with technical training targeted power generation facilities, communication nodes, and transportation systems that supported traitor military operations. These operations required careful planning to maximize disruption while avoiding civilian casualties, as Colonel Jerton understood that maintaining popular support would be essential for long-term resistance success. The sabotage teams focused on temporary disruptions rather than permanent destruction, seeking to degrade traitor capabilities without causing irreparable damage to Krieg's industrial infrastructure. The battle for the Meridian Chemical Processing Complex illustrated both the potential and limitations of loyalist guerrilla tactics. A joint force of infantry and armored units attempted to seize control of the facility to deny the traitors access to the exotic compounds that enhanced their weapons' effectiveness. The initial assault succeeded in penetrating the complex's outer defenses and establishing positions within the primary processing areas, but the Loyalists lacked sufficient numbers to hold their gains against the inevitable counterattack. The traitor response included not only conventional military forces, but also weapons that demonstrated the unnatural properties of chaos-corrupted technology, forcing the Loyalists to withdraw after suffering significant casualties. Intelligence gathering became increasingly critical as the Civil War intensified, and both sides sought to anticipate enemy movements and identify vulnerable targets. Colonel Jerton's network of loyal operatives within the traitor administration provided valuable information about planned operations, troop deployments, and supply requirements that allowed loyalist forces to position themselves advantageously for ambush operations. However, the traitors' own intelligence capabilities improved as they consolidated control over planetary security systems and began employing enhanced interrogation techniques that suggested the influence of chaos corruption on their methods. The Loyalist communication network faced constant pressure from traitor attempts to intercept messages and locate resistance command centers. Colonel Jerton's communication specialists developed increasingly sophisticated encryption methods and routing procedures that utilized Krieg's extensive industrial communication infrastructure to mask the true origins and destinations of resistance messages. These efforts required constant adaptation as traitor forces captured loyalist communication equipment and personnel who possessed knowledge of resistance procedures and protocols. Supply shortages emerged as a critical challenge for loyalist forces operating without access to official Imperial logistics networks. Ammunition consumption during urban warfare operations quickly depleted the limited stockpiles that loyal units had secured during the initial phases of the conflict, forcing commanders to implement strict rationing procedures and prioritize targets that offered the greatest strategic value. Medical supplies became particularly scarce, as loyalist forces lacked access to the advanced medical facilities controlled by the traitor government and had to rely on improvised treatment centers established in hidden locations throughout the hive cities. The recruitment of additional personnel for loyalist forces proved both essential and dangerous, as Colonel Jerton sought to expand resistance capabilities while avoiding infiltration by traitor agents. Many civilians who had initially supported the planetary government's declaration of independence began to question their allegiance as evidence of chaos corruption, became more apparent through the traitors' increasingly brutal methods and unnatural capabilities. However, recruiting these individuals required careful screening procedures to identify potential double agents and ensure that new recruits possessed the dedication necessary for the dangerous work of resistance operations. The traitor forces demonstrated their growing confidence through increasingly aggressive operations designed to eliminate loyalist resistance entirely. Large-scale sweep operations through suspected resistance areas employed not only conventional military units, but also specialized forces equipped with detection equipment that seemed to operate beyond normal Imperial technology parameters. These operations forced loyalist units to adopt even more stringent security procedures and abandon positions that had previously seemed secure from traitor detection capabilities. The realization that conventional military resistance could not ultimately prevail against the entrenched chaos forces began to emerge through accumulated evidence of the traitors' supernatural advantages. Loyalist observers reported enemy units that continued fighting despite suffering casualties that should have been immediately fatal, weapons that demonstrated destructive capabilities far beyond their apparent specifications, and coordination between traitor forces that suggested communication methods not dependent on conventional technology. These observations indicated that the rebellion had progressed beyond simple political treachery into the realm of chaos corruption that fundamentally altered the nature of the conflict. Colonel Jerton's strategic assessment acknowledged that loyalist forces alone could not restore Imperial authority to Krieg through military action. The traitors' advantages in numbers, equipment, and supernatural enhancement made their eventual victory inevitable unless external Imperial intervention could shift the balance of power. However, the colonel also recognized that loyalist resistance operations served crucial purposes beyond immediate military objectives, including gathering intelligence about chaos corruption methods, preserving Imperial doctrine and loyalty among portions of the population, and potentially providing support for future Imperial reconquest operations. The evolution of traitor tactics revealed the growing influence of chaos corruption on their military capabilities and strategic thinking. Early engagements had followed conventional Imperial Guard doctrine with predictable deployment patterns and standard equipment employment, but subsequent operations demonstrated increasingly unorthodox approaches that suggested external guidance from sources with knowledge of advanced warfare techniques. The traitors began employing psychological warfare methods designed to demoralize loyalist forces through displays of their enhanced capabilities and the futility of continued resistance. The mounting evidence of supernatural corruption among the traitor forces reached a critical threshold when Colonel Jerton's reconnaissance teams reported encounters with enemy personnel who exhibited capabilities that defied rational explanation. Loyalist snipers documented shots that should have proven immediately fatal failing to stop traitor soldiers, who continued their advance despite wounds that would have incapacitated any normal human. These observations, combined with captured equipment that incorporated materials unknown to Imperial science, convinced the colonel that Krieg faced corruption far beyond political rebellion or even standard heretical uprising. The decision to deploy atomic weapons across Krieg's surface emerged from Colonel Jerton's recognition that conventional military action could not purge the chaos taint that had infected the planet's population and infrastructure. His strategic analysis concluded that the corruption had progressed beyond the point where surgical strikes against specific targets could eliminate the heretical influence. The very materials used in traitor weapons and equipment demonstrated properties that suggested fundamental alteration of matter itself, indicating that the chaos influence had begun transforming the physical substance of Krieg at a molecular level. Colonel Jerton's access to nuclear arsenals stemmed from his position as commander of planetary defense forces and his family's control over strategic weapons manufacturing. House Jerton's foundries had produced tactical nuclear devices for Imperial Guard siege operations, maintaining stockpiles of various yield configurations designed for different battlefield applications. The colonel's authority over these weapons had been established through standard Imperial protocols that granted planetary defense commanders access to strategic assets necessary for defending against overwhelming enemy forces or preventing strategic resources from falling into hostile hands. The technical specifications of Krieg's nuclear arsenal reflected the planet's role as a major military manufacturing center. The weapons inventory included tactical devices with yields ranging from 5 kilotons to 50 kilotons, designed for battlefield deployment against concentrated enemy formations or fortified positions. Strategic warheads with yields approaching 100 kilotons were maintained for potential use against major enemy installations or to deny critical infrastructure to invading forces. The largest devices in the arsenal reached yields of several hundred kilotons, intended for use against hive-sized targets or to create devastating area denial zones. The delivery systems available to Colonel Jerton encompassed multiple platforms that could deploy nuclear weapons across Krieg's surface with precision targeting capabilities. Missile batteries positioned throughout the major hive cities maintained launch tubes loaded with nuclear-tipped warheads, their targeting systems linked to planetary defense networks that provided real-time intelligence about enemy positions and movements. Artillery pieces modified for nuclear shell deployment offered shorter range options for tactical strikes against specific targets within the combat zone. Aircraft squadrons based at Loyalist-controlled airfields possessed bomber variants capable of delivering nuclear payloads to targets beyond the range of ground-based systems. The systematic targeting of major population centers required detailed analysis of Krieg's demographic distribution and industrial infrastructure to maximize the effectiveness of nuclear strikes while ensuring complete elimination of chaos corruption. Colonel Jerton's planning staff identified primary targets based on intelligence reports indicating the highest concentrations of traitor forces and corrupted civilian populations. Hive Farograd, with its massive population and extensive industrial complexes, represented the primary target due to its role as the rebellion's administrative center and the location of the most advanced chaos-corrupted manufacturing facilities. The northern industrial complex of Hive Corvanis became a secondary target due to intelligence indicating that House Corvanis had established major food production facilities that incorporated chaos-corrupted materials into the planetary food supply. The contamination of basic nutrition sources represented a particularly insidious form of corruption that could spread the heretical taint throughout the population regardless of their political allegiances. Nuclear destruction of these facilities would prevent further distribution of corrupted food products while eliminating the personnel responsible for implementing such horrific contamination protocols. Hive Kastner's mining operations presented unique targeting challenges due to their subterranean nature and the extensive tunnel networks that extended deep beneath the planet's surface. The intelligence reports detailing Lord Kastner's discovery of unusual crystalline formations suggested that these underground structures might serve as focal points for chaos corruption, potentially channeling warp energies directly into Krieg's geological foundation. Nuclear strikes against the surface installations would need to be supplemented by specialized penetrator warheads designed to collapse the tunnel systems and bury the corrupted mining operations under millions of tons of irradiated debris. The Meridian Chemical Processing Complex required particular attention due to the exotic compounds that had been discovered during House Meridian's unauthorized research projects. These substances had demonstrated properties that suggested they might survive conventional nuclear destruction, potentially serving as seeds for renewed chaos corruption even after the elimination of the human population. The targeting plan for this facility incorporated multiple overlapping nuclear strikes with different yield configurations to ensure complete molecular destruction of all materials within the complex and the surrounding area. The timing of the nuclear bombardment required careful coordination to achieve maximum effectiveness while preventing traitor forces from implementing countermeasures or evacuation procedures. Colonel Jerton's intelligence network provided information about traitor troop deployments and civilian population distributions that allowed his planning staff to identify optimal strike windows when target areas would contain the highest concentrations of corrupted personnel. The simultaneous nature of the strikes would prevent communication between target areas and eliminate any possibility of organized response to the nuclear assault. The launch sequence began with tactical strikes against traitor military installations to eliminate their command and control capabilities before they could respond to the larger strategic bombardment. Nuclear-tipped missiles targeted communication centers, military headquarters, and air defense installations that might interfere with subsequent bomber operations. These initial strikes employed smaller-yield warheads to minimize immediate radiation effects that could interfere with the guidance systems of follow-up weapons, while still ensuring complete destruction of their assigned targets. The strategic bombardment of major hive cities commenced within minutes of the tactical strikes, as missile batteries throughout Loyalist-controlled areas launched their nuclear payloads toward predetermined coordinates. The weapons followed ballistic trajectories that would bring them to their targets within approximately 15 minutes of launch, providing insufficient time for meaningful evacuation efforts even if traitor forces had maintained functional warning systems. The missile's guidance systems incorporated multiple redundant navigation methods to ensure accuracy despite potential electromagnetic interference from the initial tactical strikes. Hive Farograd received the heaviest concentration of nuclear strikes, with 12 separate warheads targeting different sections of the massive urban complex. The primary administrative district, housing the corrupted Planetary Council and the majority of traitor leadership, was struck by a 400-kiloton device that vaporized the entire governmental complex and created a crater extending nearly 2 kilometers in diameter. Industrial sectors received multiple smaller warheads designed to ensure complete destruction of manufacturing facilities while creating overlapping radiation zones that would prevent any survival of chaos, corrupted materials, or personnel. The detonation sequence created a cascading series of explosions that transformed Hive Farograd into a hellscape of nuclear fire and radiation. The initial strikes generated electromagnetic pulses that disabled electronic systems throughout the hive, plunging the massive structure into darkness seconds before the thermal effects reached inhabited areas. The nuclear fireballs expanded rapidly through the hive's corridors and chambers, their temperatures exceeding those found in stellar cores and instantly vaporizing everything within their reach. The pressure waves that followed collapsed structural supports and brought down entire sections of the hive's superstructure. Hive Korvanis experienced similar devastation as 8 nuclear warheads struck its primary population and industrial centers. The food production facilities that had been corrupted by chaos influence disappeared in nuclear fire, their contaminated products and processing equipment reduced to radioactive ash that would pose no further threat to Krieg's surviving population. The hive's residential sectors, housing millions of civilians who had been exposed to corrupted food supplies, were completely obliterated by overlapping nuclear strikes that ensured no possibility of survival for anyone who might have been infected by the heretical taint. The mining complexes of Hive Kastner required specialized targeting due to their underground nature and the potential for chaos corruption to have spread through the extensive tunnel networks. Penetrator warheads designed for bunker-busting operations struck the surface installations before boring deep into the planet's crust and detonating at predetermined depths. These underground explosions collapsed thousands of kilometers of mining tunnels while creating radioactive zones that would remain lethal for centuries. The mysterious crystalline formations that had attracted Lord Kastner's attention were buried under millions of tons of irradiated rock and debris. The Meridian Chemical Processing Complex received the most intensive nuclear bombardment, with specialized warheads designed to achieve complete molecular destruction of all materials within the facility. The exotic compounds that had demonstrated unusual properties during House Meridian's research were subjected to nuclear temperatures and radiation levels that exceeded any natural phenomena in the galaxy. Multiple overlapping explosions created a zone of absolute destruction where even the atomic structure of matter was disrupted, ensuring that no trace of chaos-corrupted materials could survive to threaten future inhabitants of the planet. Secondary targets throughout Krieg's surface received nuclear strikes designed to eliminate smaller concentrations of traitor forces and prevent any organized resistance to the purification process. Noble house compounds that had served as centers of chaos corruption were destroyed by tactical nuclear weapons that eliminated their inhabitants while creating radiation barriers that would prevent access to any surviving heretical materials. Transportation networks that might have allowed traitor forces to escape the bombardment were severed by nuclear strikes against key bridges, tunnels, and spaceport facilities. The immediate aftermath of the nuclear bombardment transformed Krieg from a thriving industrial world into a radioactive wasteland, where survival became virtually impossible for unprotected human life. The massive explosions had injected enormous quantities of radioactive material into the planet's atmosphere, creating fallout clouds that would spread contamination across the entire surface over the following weeks and months. The electromagnetic effects of multiple nuclear detonations disrupted communication systems and electronic equipment throughout the planet, effectively isolating any surviving populations from contact with off-world Imperial forces. The atmospheric effects of the nuclear bombardment created a perpetual shroud of radioactive dust and debris that blocked sunlight from reaching Krieg's surface. The nuclear winter conditions that resulted from this atmospheric contamination caused immediate climate changes that made agriculture impossible and eliminated most forms of surface vegetation within months of the bombardment. The planet's weather patterns were fundamentally altered by the massive energy release and atmospheric disruption, creating constant storms that carried radioactive particles across vast distances and ensured that no area of the surface remained uncontaminated. The destruction of Krieg's major hive cities eliminated approximately 90% of the planet's population within the first hours following the nuclear strikes. The survivors who had been located in deep underground facilities or remote areas faced immediate challenges from radiation exposure, contaminated food and water supplies, and the complete breakdown of technological infrastructure that had previously supported planetary civilization. These scattered groups of survivors found themselves isolated in a hostile environment where the very air and soil had become lethal to human life. The theological justification for the mass extermination emerged from Imperial doctrine regarding the treatment of chaos corruption and the absolute necessity of preventing heretical taint from spreading to other worlds. Colonel Jerton's decision to deploy nuclear weapons was grounded in established precedents where Imperial commanders had chosen to destroy entire populations rather than risk allowing chaos corruption to escape containment. The Codex Imperialis contains specific provisions authorizing planetary governors and military commanders to employ any means necessary to prevent the spread of heretical influence, including the complete sterilization of infected worlds. The acceptance of the nuclear bombardment by surviving loyalist forces reflected their understanding of the existential threat posed by chaos corruption and their recognition that conventional military action had proven insufficient to eliminate the heretical taint. The evidence of supernatural enhancement among traitor forces and the discovery of chaos-corrupted materials in the planet's industrial infrastructure convinced loyalist commanders that nuclear purification represented the only viable method for ensuring that Krieg could never again serve as a source of corruption threatening other Imperial worlds. The radioactive transformation of Krieg's surface created conditions that would persist for millennia, ensuring that the planet's purification would serve as a permanent reminder of the price of heresy and the lengths to which loyal Imperial servants would go to preserve the Imperium from chaos corruption. The nuclear wasteland became a monument to the absolute dedication required to serve the Emperor and the willingness of true Imperial citizens to sacrifice everything, including their own lives and world, rather than allow the forces of chaos to achieve victory. The nuclear holocaust that consumed Krieg's surface created an environment so hostile to human life that survival required immediate adaptation to conditions unlike anything previously encountered in Imperial history. The scattered groups of loyalist forces who had taken shelter in the deepest underground facilities faced the grim reality that their world had been transformed into a radioactive tomb where the very air carried death with every breath. The massive bunker complexes that had originally served as emergency command centers and equipment storage facilities became the only habitable spaces on a planet where surface exposure meant certain death within hours. The Farograd Deep Command Complex, Colonel Jerton's primary headquarters during the final stages of the Civil War, housed approximately 8,000 survivors in facilities designed to accommodate half that number during temporary emergencies. The bunker's life support systems struggled to maintain breathable atmosphere while filtering the radioactive particles that infiltrated even the most sophisticated air purification equipment. Emergency rations intended to sustain the facility's occupants for several weeks stretched to cover months as the survivors realized that return to the surface would not be possible within any reasonable timeframe. The survivors in the Corvani's mining shelter faced even more challenging conditions, as their facility had been hastily converted from industrial storage areas that lacked proper life support infrastructure. 3,000 individuals crowded into spaces where mining equipment had been cleared to make room for basic living quarters, sleeping in shifts due to insufficient space for permanent accommodations. The facility's water recycling systems, originally designed to process industrial coolants and cleaning solutions, required constant maintenance to produce potable water from the contaminated groundwater that seeped through the facility's foundations. The Kastner Deep Works represented the largest surviving population concentration, with nearly 12,000 individuals sheltering in the extensive tunnel networks that had been excavated during decades of mining operations. The natural protection provided by hundreds of meters of solid rock offered superior radiation shielding compared to the constructed bunkers, but the facility's improvised nature created constant challenges for maintaining order and distributing resources among such a large population. The mining tunnels had never been intended for long-term habitation, lacking proper ventilation systems and waste management facilities necessary to support thousands of people indefinitely. The initial weeks following the nuclear bombardment revealed the extent of the challenges facing the underground survivors. Radiation monitoring equipment indicated that surface levels remained lethal to unprotected humans, with readings showing contamination levels that would require decades or centuries to decrease to potentially survivable thresholds. The atmospheric contamination created by the nuclear strikes had fundamentally altered Krieg's environment, turning the planet's surface into a wasteland where even brief exposure would cause fatal radiation poisoning within days. The psychological impact of total isolation from the outside galaxy proved as challenging as the physical hardships of underground survival. Communication equipment capable of reaching off-world Imperial forces had been destroyed during the nuclear bombardment, leaving the survivors with no means of requesting assistance or even confirming that the Imperium still existed beyond their devastated world. The complete absence of external contact created an atmosphere of uncertainty and despair that threatened to undermine the discipline and morale necessary for long-term survival in such harsh conditions. Colonel Jerton's leadership during these critical early months established the foundation for what would eventually become the distinctive culture of the Death Korps. His recognition that survival required absolute discipline and unwavering commitment to Imperial doctrine led to the implementation of strict protocols that governed every aspect of underground life. The colonel understood that the survivors represented the last loyal Imperial citizens on Krieg, carrying the responsibility to preserve Imperial values and eventually reclaim their world from the radioactive devastation that had purged it of chaos corruption. The establishment of formal military hierarchy within the underground facilities served multiple purposes beyond simple organization of resources and personnel. The familiar structure of Imperial Guard command protocols provided psychological stability for survivors who had lost everything else familiar about their previous lives. The maintenance of military discipline also ensured that critical decisions regarding resource allocation, work assignments, and security measures would be made based on strategic necessity rather than emotional responses to their desperate circumstances. The development of survival protocols required careful adaptation of Imperial Guard regulations to address the unique challenges of underground existence in a radioactive environment. Standard duty rotations were modified to account for the limited space and resources available within the bunker facilities, with personnel assigned to multiple responsibilities that had previously been handled by specialized units. Guards responsible for facility security also maintained life support equipment, while communications specialists doubled as medical orderlies when their primary duties allowed such flexibility. The rationing systems implemented within the underground facilities reflected both the scarcity of resources and the military mindset that prioritized mission accomplishment over individual comfort. Food distribution followed strict schedules that allocated calories based on work assignments and physical requirements, with additional rations provided to personnel engaged in physically demanding maintenance tasks or security duties. Water consumption was monitored and regulated to ensure that the facility's recycling systems could maintain adequate supplies while accounting for inevitable equipment failures and contamination issues. The medical challenges facing the underground populations required innovative solutions using limited supplies and improvised equipment. Radiation exposure symptoms appeared among personnel who had been on or near the surface during the nuclear bombardment, creating immediate demands for treatment methods that exceeded the capabilities of standard Imperial Guard medical facilities. The survivors included several medical officers and trained medics, but their supplies of specialized medications and treatment equipment had been exhausted within weeks of the initial emergency. The adaptation to permanent underground existence began with modifications to the physical infrastructure of the bunker facilities. Sleeping areas were reconfigured to maximize capacity while providing minimal privacy for individuals and families who had lost their homes in the nuclear devastation. Common areas were established for meals, meetings, and limited recreational activities that helped maintain morale during the long periods of confinement. Workshop spaces were created where personnel could maintain equipment, repair clothing and personal items, and engage in productive activities that contributed to the community's survival. The development of work assignments reflected both immediate survival needs and long-term planning for eventual surface operations. Teams were organized to maintain life support systems, monitor radiation levels, and preserve equipment that would be necessary for future military operations. Other groups focused on food production using hydroponic systems improvised from available materials, while specialized teams worked on developing protective equipment that would allow limited surface excursions when radiation levels decreased sufficiently. The preservation of imperial doctrine and military traditions became a central focus of daily life within the underground communities. Regular prayer sessions honored the emperor and reinforced the religious foundations of imperial service, while training exercises maintained military skills and physical fitness despite the confined conditions. Veterans shared their knowledge with younger survivors, ensuring that military expertise and tactical knowledge would be preserved for future generations who might eventually reclaim Krieg's surface. The emergence of a distinct cultural identity among the survivors reflected their unique circumstances and the psychological adaptation required for long-term underground survival. The constant awareness of death surrounding them on the radioactive surface above created a fatalistic mindset that embraced sacrifice as both necessary and honorable. The survivors understood that their continued existence represented a form of penance for their world's fall to chaos corruption, and that their duty to the emperor required them to endure any hardship necessary to eventually restore imperial authority to Krieg. The development of specialized equipment for survival in the radioactive environment began with modifications to existing Imperial Guard gear, using materials and components available within the bunker facilities. Standard issue respirators were enhanced with additional filtration stages to remove radioactive particles from inhaled air, while protective clothing was layered with improvised shielding materials to reduce radiation exposure during necessary surface excursions. These early protective systems were crude and uncomfortable, but they provided the foundation for more sophisticated equipment that would eventually become standard for all Death Korps personnel. The first experimental surface missions occurred approximately 6 months after the nuclear bombardment, when radiation levels had decreased enough to allow brief excursions by personnel wearing improvised protective equipment. These missions served multiple purposes, including assessment of surface conditions, recovery of useful materials from destroyed facilities, and psychological preparation for eventual full-scale surface operations. The volunteers who participated in these dangerous missions understood that they faced significant risks of radiation exposure and death, but their willingness to accept such dangers demonstrated the dedication that would characterize future Death Korps operations. The surface reconnaissance revealed the extent of Krieg's transformation from industrial world to radioactive wasteland. The massive hive cities had been reduced to twisted ruins of metal and rockcrete. Their towering structures collapsed into radioactive rubble that would remain dangerous for centuries. The industrial complexes that had once produced weapons and vehicles for Imperial forces were completely destroyed, their sophisticated manufacturing equipment buried under tons of contaminated debris. The transportation networks that had connected different regions of the planet were severed by nuclear craters and radiation barriers that made surface travel extremely hazardous. The discovery of other survivor groups during extended surface reconnaissance missions provided both opportunities and challenges for the emerging Death Korps communities. Small groups of civilians who had taken shelter in improvised bunkers or natural caves were located throughout Krieg's devastated landscape, their survival dependent on luck and resourcefulness rather than military planning and discipline. The integration of these survivors into the established military communities required careful screening to ensure loyalty and discipline, while providing medical treatment and psychological support for individuals traumatized by months of isolation and constant fear. The establishment of communication networks between different survivor communities became a priority as the underground populations grew and their resource requirements exceeded the capacity of individual facilities. Messenger services using personnel equipped with the most advanced protective equipment available carried information and supplies between bunker complexes, maintaining coordination between different groups while assessing the overall situation across Krieg's surface. These dangerous missions required volunteers willing to traverse kilometers of radioactive wasteland while carrying vital communications that could determine the survival of entire communities. The development of manufacturing capabilities within the underground facilities represented a crucial step toward eventual military reorganization and surface operations. Improvised workshops produced replacement parts for life support equipment, modifications to protective gear, and simple weapons that could be used for defense against potential threats. The survivors included numerous skilled technicians and engineers who had worked in Krieg's industrial facilities before the nuclear bombardment, providing the expertise necessary to establish basic manufacturing capabilities using salvaged materials and improvised tools. The emergence of formal military units from the survivor populations reflected both practical necessity and the psychological need to maintain Imperial Guard traditions and identity. The most experienced veterans were appointed as officers and non-commissioned officers, while younger survivors were organized into squads and companies that could be trained and equipped for specific missions. These units initially focused on internal security and resource gathering operations, but their training emphasized the eventual goal of surface combat operations against any remaining chaos, corruption, or external threats to Krieg. The development of specialized roles within the Death Korps communities reflected the unique requirements of survival in a radioactive environment and the long-term goal of planetary reclamation. engineers specialized in radiation detection and protective equipment maintenance, while medical personnel developed expertise in treating radiation exposure and related health problems. Communications specialists worked to establish contact with off-world Imperial forces, while logistics personnel managed the complex resource allocation required to sustain large underground populations indefinitely. The adaptation of Imperial Guard doctrine to accommodate the unique circumstances of the Death Korps began with modifications to standard training procedures and operational protocols. Traditional emphasis on rapid deployment and mobile warfare was supplemented by intensive training in siege warfare, tunnel fighting, and operations in contaminated environments. The survivors understood that their eventual return to active Imperial service would require capabilities that differed significantly from conventional Imperial Guard units, necessitating specialized training and equipment that reflected their unique experience and environment. The psychological transformation of the survivors into the Death Korps mentality involved acceptance of death as a constant companion and sacrifice, as the highest form of service to the Emperor. The daily reality of life surrounded by lethal radiation created an intimate familiarity with mortality that shaped every aspect of their culture and military doctrine. The survivors understood that their continued existence was temporary and that their ultimate purpose was to serve the Emperor through whatever means necessary, regardless of personal cost or survival prospects. The fortress world of Vrax Prime occupied a strategic position within the Segmentum Solar that made its loss to heretical forces an unacceptable threat to Imperial security. Located along critical supply routes that connected Terra to the outer reaches of the Segmentum, Vrax served as a massive ammunition depot and staging area for Imperial Guard operations throughout the region. The planet's surface bristled with defensive installations, underground storage complexes, and orbital defense platforms that had been constructed over centuries to protect the vast quantities of military supplies stored within its armored vaults. Cardinal Zaffin's rise to power on Vrax represented a textbook example of how chaos corruption could infiltrate even the most heavily fortified Imperial installations through patient subversion of key personnel. The Cardinal had arrived on Vrax as part of a routine ecclesiastical inspection, his credentials and reputation placing him above suspicion from the planet's security forces. His gradual accumulation of influence among the Adeptus Ministorum personnel stationed on Vrax followed familiar patterns of heretical corruption, beginning with theological discussions that slowly introduced concepts incompatible with orthodox Imperial doctrine. The Cardinal's declaration of independence from Imperial authority came after months of careful preparation that had systematically compromised Vrax's command structure and defensive capabilities. His control over the planet's extensive PDF forces provided him with a military capability that far exceeded what most rebellious governors could muster, while his influence over the Adeptus Ministorum personnel gave his rebellion a religious legitimacy that attracted supporters from across the planet's population. The fortress world's isolation and self-sufficiency meant that the rebellion could sustain itself indefinitely without external support, creating a strategic threat that demanded immediate Imperial response. The Adeptus Munitorum's assessment of the Vrax situation emphasized both the immediate tactical threat posed by the rebellion and the broader strategic implications of allowing such a heavily fortified world to remain in heretical hands. The ammunition stockpiles stored on Vrax could supply entire Crusade fleets for years of continuous operations, while the planet's manufacturing facilities produced specialized ordnance types that were essential for specific types of Imperial Guard operations. The loss of these resources to heretical forces represented not only a significant reduction in Imperial military capability, but also the potential for these supplies to be turned against loyal Imperial forces. The initial Imperial response to the Vrax rebellion involved conventional siege warfare tactics that had proven effective against similar fortified positions throughout Imperial history. The first wave of Imperial Guard regiments deployed to Vrax included veteran siege specialists from multiple sectors, their experience in reducing fortified positions, providing the expertise necessary to overcome the planet's extensive defensive systems. These forces established siege lines around the planet's primary fortress complexes, while orbital bombardment ships targeted key defensive installations and supply depots. The failure of conventional siege tactics became apparent within months of the initial Imperial deployment, as Vrak's defenders demonstrated capabilities that exceeded normal expectations for PDF forces. The planet's defensive systems had been enhanced with equipment and techniques that suggested external assistance from sources with advanced military knowledge. The heretical forces employed defensive strategies that maximized the effectiveness of their fortified positions while minimizing their exposure to Imperial firepower, indicating command expertise that went beyond what Cardinal Zaffin's rebellion should have possessed. The decision to deploy the Death Korps of Krieg to Vrax reflected both the unique requirements of the siege campaign and the regiment's specialized capabilities in attritional warfare. The Adeptus Archives analysis identified the Death Korps as the optimal choice for a prolonged siege operation that would require sustained combat effectiveness despite heavy casualties and harsh environmental conditions. The regiment's experience with underground warfare, siege operations, and combat in contaminated environments made them ideally suited for the specific challenges that Vrax presented to Imperial forces. The Death Korps deployment to Vrax involved the largest single commitment of the regiment's forces since their official recognition as an Imperial Guard unit. 12 full regiments of Death Korps infantry, supported by armored battalions and artillery companies, were transported to the Vrax system aboard requisition transport vessels that had been modified to accommodate the regiment's specialized equipment and environmental requirements. The deployment represented nearly 40% of the Death Korps' total strength, demonstrating the Imperium's commitment to resolving the Vrax situation regardless of cost. The Death Korps' initial assessment of the Vrax battlefield revealed the extent of the challenges facing Imperial forces attempting to reduce the planet's fortifications through conventional siege warfare. The fortress complexes incorporated multiple layers of defensive positions that channeled attacking forces into predetermined killing zones where concentrated firepower could inflict maximum casualties. The underground tunnel networks that connected different defensive positions allowed defenders to reinforce threatened areas while remaining protected from orbital bombardment and artillery strikes. The establishment of Death Korps siege lines around the primary fortress complexes followed tactical doctrines that emphasized methodical advancement through systematic destruction of enemy defensive positions. The regiment's engineers began construction of extensive trench networks that would allow Imperial forces to approach enemy positions while maintaining protection from defensive fire. These siege works incorporated lessons learned from Krieg's own civil war, including specialized techniques for underground warfare and operations in contaminated environments. The trench warfare that characterized the Vrax campaign represented the Death Korps' most natural form of combat, their training and equipment optimized for the grinding attritional warfare that defined siege operations. The regiment's standard tactics emphasized patient advancement through enemy defensive lines, using coordinated infantry assaults supported by concentrated artillery bombardments. These methods required enormous expenditures of ammunition and personnel, but they provided reliable results against fortified positions that could not be reduced through maneuver warfare or rapid assault tactics. The Death Korps artillery companies deployed to Vrax brought specialized siege equipment that had been developed specifically for reducing heavily fortified positions. Earthshaker cannons provided long-range bombardment capabilities that could target enemy positions from beyond the range of defensive fire, while Basilisk self-propelled guns offered mobile artillery support for advancing infantry units. The regiment's Medusa siege guns proved particularly effective against the reinforced bunkers and defensive installations that protected Vrax's key strategic positions. The systematic reduction of outer defensive positions required months of coordinated operations that demonstrated the Death Korps' expertise in siege warfare. Each defensive complex was subjected to prolonged artillery bombardments that destroyed external equipment and weakened structural supports before infantry assaults eliminated the remaining defenders. The regiment's willingness to accept heavy casualties during these operations allowed them to maintain constant pressure on enemy positions, preventing the defenders from recovering between attacks or reorganizing their defensive lines. The underground warfare that developed as Imperial forces penetrated deeper into Vrak's defensive systems played to the Death Korps' specialized training and experience. The regiment's engineers proved particularly skilled at tunnel warfare, using explosives and specialized digging equipment to create new passages through enemy defensive lines, while collapsing tunnels that could be used by defenders for counterattacks. These underground operations required careful coordination between engineering teams and infantry units that would exploit the breaches created by demolition operations. The Death Korps' approach to casualties during the Vrak's campaign reflected their fundamental acceptance of death as an inevitable consequence of service to the Emperor. The regiment's commanders planned operations based on strategic objectives rather than casualty minimization, accepting losses that would have been considered unacceptable by conventional Imperial Guard units. This willingness to sacrifice personnel for tactical advantage allowed the Death Korps to maintain offensive pressure even when facing defensive positions that inflicted enormous casualties on attacking forces. The siege of Fortress Complex Alpha 7 illustrated the Death Korps' tactical methods and their effectiveness against heavily fortified positions. The complex consisted of multiple reinforced bunkers connected by underground tunnels, with overlapping fields of fire that created killing zones covering all approaches to the position. The Death Korps' response involved simultaneous attacks against multiple points in the defensive perimeter, forcing the defenders to divide their fire while preventing them from concentrating their forces against any single assault. The preliminary bombardment of Complex Alpha 7 continued for 6 days, with Death Korps artillery units firing over 12,000 rounds of various calibers against the fortress installations. The bombardment targeted not only the visible defensive positions, but also suspected underground facilities and supply routes that connected the complex to other defensive positions. The sustained artillery fire destroyed external equipment and communication systems, while creating breaches in the fortress walls that could be exploited by infantry assaults. The infantry assault on Complex Alpha 7 began with coordinated attacks by 3 Death Korps regiments advancing simultaneously from different directions. The 143rd Death Korps Infantry Regiment approached from the north through a series of communication trenches that had been excavated over several weeks of preparation. The 88th Death Korps Infantry Regiment advanced from the east using specialized assault equipment designed for breaching fortified positions. The 291st Death Korps Infantry Regiment attacked from the south, their assault timed to coincide with the other attacks to prevent the defenders from concentrating their fire. The breakthrough at Complex Alpha 7 came after 18 hours of continuous combat that demonstrated both the Death Korps' tactical effectiveness and their willingness to accept enormous casualties in pursuit of strategic objectives. The 143rd Regiment suffered 60% casualties during their assault on the northern defensive positions, but their sacrifice allowed the 88th Regiment to penetrate the fortress perimeter and establish positions within the complex itself. The 291st Regiment's diversionary attack drew defensive fire away from the main assault, enabling the breakthrough that ultimately led to the complex's capture. The reduction of individual defensive positions within Complex Alpha 7 required specialized techniques that the Death Korps had developed through their experience with siege warfare. Flamethrower teams cleared bunkers and tunnel systems where conventional weapons proved ineffective, while demolition specialists used explosive charges to collapse defensive positions that could not be taken by direct assault. The regiment's combat engineers proved particularly valuable in these operations, their expertise in underground warfare allowing them to navigate the complex tunnel systems while avoiding defensive traps and prepared ambush positions. The capture of Complex Alpha 7 provided Imperial forces with their first major breakthrough in the Vrax siege, demonstrating that the planet's defenses could be reduced through sustained pressure and coordinated assault operations. The complex's fall eliminated a key strongpoint in the heretical defensive network, while providing Imperial forces with access to underground tunnel systems that could be used for further advances. The Death Korps' success at Alpha 7 established the tactical template that would be used throughout the remainder of the siege campaign. The expansion of Death Korps siege operations following the Alpha 7 victory involved the systematic targeting of remaining fortress complexes using similar tactics and techniques. Each defensive position was subjected to prolonged artillery bombardments followed by coordinated infantry assaults that exploited weaknesses identified through reconnaissance and previous combat experience. The regiment's growing familiarity with Vrax defensive systems allowed them to refine their tactics and reduce the time required to capture individual positions. The siege of Fortress Complex Beta 3 demonstrated the evolution of Death Korps tactics as they adapted to the specific challenges presented by different types of defensive installations. Beta 3 incorporated more extensive underground facilities than previous targets, requiring specialized tunnel warfare techniques that emphasized demolition operations and underground assault tactics. The Death Korps engineers developed new methods for mapping enemy tunnel systems while creating their own underground approaches that could bypass surface defensive positions. The breakthrough operations at Beta 3 involved the use of specialized assault troops equipped with enhanced protective equipment and close combat weapons optimized for tunnel fighting. These units advanced through captured tunnel systems, while combat engineers collapsed passages behind them to prevent enemy counterattacks. The confined nature of underground combat required different tactical approaches than surface operations, with small unit tactics replacing the large-scale coordinated assaults that characterized surface siege warfare. The systematic destruction of Vrax's defensive network continued for over a decade as Death Korps forces methodically reduced each fortress complex while expanding their control over the planet's surface. The regiment's willingness to accept heavy casualties allowed them to maintain constant offensive pressure that prevented the defenders from reorganizing their positions or developing effective countermeasures to Imperial siege tactics. The prolonged nature of the campaign created opportunities for the Death Korps to refine their techniques while training new personnel in the specialized skills required for siege warfare. The final phase of the Vrax siege involved operations against the planet's central fortress complex, where Cardinal Zaffin had established his primary command center and the most heavily defended positions on the planet. These installations incorporated defensive features that exceeded anything previously encountered during the siege, including enhanced fortifications that demonstrated clear evidence of chaos corruption and supernatural enhancement. The Death Korps' assault on these positions required modifications to their standard tactics to account for enemy capabilities that went beyond conventional military technology. The ultimate victory at Vrax came at a cost that would have been considered catastrophic by conventional Imperial Guard standards, but which the Death Korps accepted as the inevitable price of service to the Emperor. The regiment's casualties during the 17-year siege exceeded 70% of their deployed strength, with some individual regiments suffering complete destruction while achieving their assigned objectives. The Death Korps' willingness to continue operations despite such losses demonstrated their unique value as siege specialists capable of succeeding where conventional forces would have failed. The Death Korps of Krieg operates under a regimental structure that reflects both standard Imperial Guard organizational principles and unique adaptations necessitated by their specialized role as siege warfare specialists. The Adeptus Militarum classifies Death Korps formations according to their primary tactical function, with distinct organizational patterns for infantry, armored, and artillery regiments that maximize effectiveness in prolonged siege operations, while maintaining compatibility with broader Imperial Guard command structures. Death Korps infantry regiments follow a standardized organization that emphasizes sustained combat capability over rapid deployment or maneuver warfare. Each regiment consists of approximately 4,000 personnel organized into 5 battalions, with each battalion containing 4 companies of roughly 200 soldiers. This structure provides regimental commanders with sufficient tactical flexibility to conduct simultaneous operations against multiple objectives while maintaining reserves for exploitation of breakthrough opportunities or response to enemy counterattacks. The battalion structure within Death Korps infantry regiments incorporates specialized support elements that reflect the unique requirements of siege warfare. Each battalion includes a dedicated engineering company equipped with demolition specialists, tunnel warfare experts, and fortification construction teams. These engineers possess specialized training in underground combat operations, mine warfare, and the reduction of fortified positions using both conventional explosives and improvised demolition techniques developed during the regiment's experience on Krieg and subsequent campaign deployments. Company organization within Death Korps infantry battalions emphasizes small unit cohesion and tactical flexibility necessary for the close quarters combat that characterizes siege operations. Each company contains 4 platoons of approximately 50 soldiers, with platoons further divided into 5 squads of 10 men each. This organizational structure allows company commanders to conduct complex multi-axis attacks against fortified positions while maintaining sufficient command and control to coordinate supporting fires and engineer operations. The squad-level organization of Death Korps infantry reflects their specialization in assault operations against prepared defensive positions. Each 10-man squad includes a sergeant, a Vox operator for communication with higher headquarters, 2 specialists equipped with special weapons such as flamers or meltaguns, and 6 riflemen armed with standard-issue lasguns. This composition provides squad leaders with the firepower necessary to suppress enemy defensive positions while maintaining the communication links essential for coordinating complex assault operations. Death Korps armored regiments operate under organizational structures that prioritize sustained fire support for infantry operations rather than independent armored warfare. These regiments typically consist of 3 armored battalions supported by a reconnaissance company and a maintenance company capable of conducting field repairs under combat conditions. Each armored battalion contains 3 companies equipped with Leman Russ battle tanks, with company strength varying between 12 and 15 vehicles, depending on operational requirements and equipment availability. The tank companies within Death Korps armored regiments employ vehicle configurations optimized for siege warfare rather than mobile operations. The majority of Leman Russ tanks are equipped with battle cannons suitable for engaging fortified positions and enemy armor at extended ranges, while specialized variants include demolisher tanks armed with siege cannons for bunker-busting operations, and executioner tanks equipped with plasma cannons for precision strikes against hardened targets. This diverse equipment mix allows armored companies to provide appropriate fire support for specific tactical situations encountered during siege operations. The reconnaissance elements within Death Korps armored regiments operate sentinel walkers and armored cars designed for gathering intelligence about enemy defensive positions and identifying vulnerable points in fortification systems. These units conduct extended observation missions that provide regimental commanders with detailed information about enemy troop movements, defensive preparations, and potential breakthrough opportunities. The reconnaissance companies also coordinate with infantry scouts and engineering teams to develop comprehensive assessments of enemy capabilities and defensive weaknesses. Death Korps artillery regiments represent perhaps the most critical component of the organization's siege warfare capabilities, providing the sustained bombardment capability necessary to reduce fortified positions and suppress enemy defensive fires during infantry assaults. These regiments consist of multiple batteries equipped with different types of artillery pieces selected for specific roles within comprehensive fire support plans. The organizational structure emphasizes coordination between different artillery types to achieve maximum effectiveness against diverse target sets. The heavy artillery batteries within Death Korps artillery regiments operate Earthshaker cannons and Medusa siege guns capable of delivering sustained bombardments against fortified positions at ranges exceeding 30 kilometers. These weapons provide the long-range fire support necessary to engage enemy positions from beyond the effective range of defensive fires, allowing artillery crews to maintain continuous bombardment schedules without exposure to immediate counterattack. The heavy batteries typically consist of 6 to 8 guns, with crew sizes adjusted to maintain continuous operations during extended siege campaigns. Self-propelled artillery batteries equipped with basilisk gun platforms provide mobile fire support that can advance with attacking infantry units, while maintaining the ability to engage targets of opportunity as they develop during assault operations. These batteries operate in close coordination with infantry commanders to provide immediate fire support for breakthrough operations and the reduction of specific defensive positions that threaten advancing troops. The mobility of self-propelled artillery allows Death Korps commanders to concentrate firepower rapidly against critical targets while avoiding the time delays associated with repositioning towed artillery pieces. The integration of multiple artillery types within Death Korps fire support plans requires sophisticated coordination procedures that ensure maximum effectiveness while preventing fratricidal incidents during complex operations. Artillery observers attached to infantry units maintain direct communication with battery commanders to coordinate fire missions and adjust targeting based on real-time battlefield conditions. These observers receive specialized training in siege warfare techniques and possess the authority to call for immediate fire support without requiring approval from higher headquarters when tactical situations demand rapid response. The role of commissars within Death Korps units presents unique challenges that reflect the regiment's distinctive attitude toward death and sacrifice in service to the Emperor. Unlike their function in conventional Imperial Guard units, where commissars primarily serve to maintain discipline and prevent cowardice, Death Korps commissars often find themselves restraining overly aggressive soldiers who seek martyrdom without regard for tactical objectives or strategic considerations. This reversal of traditional commissar duties requires specialized training and psychological preparation for personnel assigned to Death Korps units. Death Korps commissars undergo additional instruction in siege warfare tactics and the specific cultural characteristics that define the regiment's approach to military operations. These officers must understand the psychological factors that drive Death Korps soldiers to seek death in battle, while channeling that dedication toward achieving tactical objectives rather than meaningless sacrifice. The commissars serve as intermediaries between Death Korps commanders and conventional Imperial Guard officers who may not understand or appreciate the regiment's unique operational methods. The relationship between Death Korps personnel and their assigned commissars differs significantly from standard Imperial Guard practice due to the regiment's absolute loyalty to Imperial doctrine and their willing acceptance of any sacrifice demanded by military necessity. Death Korps soldiers rarely require motivation to advance against enemy positions or maintain discipline under fire, but they may require restraint to prevent tactically unsound attacks that waste personnel without achieving meaningful objectives. Commissars assigned to Death Korps units often find themselves managing enthusiasm rather than combating reluctance or cowardice. The Adeptus Militarum classification system for Death Korps units incorporates specialized designations that reflect their unique capabilities and equipment requirements. Death Korps infantry regiments receive priority allocations of siege warfare equipment, including specialized demolition charges, tunnel warfare gear, and enhanced protective equipment designed for operations in contaminated environments. These allocations recognize the regiment's specialized role, while ensuring that their unique capabilities remain available for deployment against appropriate targets. Equipment standardization within Death Korps units follows Imperial Guard patterns, with modifications that reflect their operational specialization and the harsh environmental conditions of their homeworld. Standard-issue Death Korps equipment includes enhanced respirators capable of filtering radioactive particles and chemical contaminants, reinforced flak armor with additional protection against shrapnel and debris common in siege warfare, and specialized entrenching tools designed for rapid fortification construction in various soil and rock conditions. The distinctive Death Korps uniform serves both practical and psychological functions that support the regiment's operational effectiveness. The heavy greatcoats worn by Death Korps personnel provide protection against environmental hazards while creating a distinctive appearance that reinforces unit identity and esprit de corps. The uniform's dark colors and functional design reflect the regiment's grim determination and their acceptance of death as an inevitable consequence of military service. Death Korps weapons allocations emphasize reliability and effectiveness in siege warfare conditions rather than advanced technology or specialized capabilities. The regiment's standard-issue lasguns are manufactured to specifications that prioritize durability and ease of maintenance over rate of fire or exotic ammunition types. This approach ensures that Death Korps units can maintain their weapons in operational condition during extended siege campaigns where resupply opportunities may be limited and maintenance facilities unavailable. The integration of Death Korps regiments with conventional Imperial Guard forces requires careful coordination to ensure that their specialized capabilities are employed effectively while maintaining overall operational coherence. Death Korps commanders receive training in joint operations procedures that allow them to coordinate with other Imperial Guard units while preserving their tactical autonomy in siege warfare operations. This training emphasizes communication protocols and tactical coordination rather than modification of Death Korps operational methods. Joint operations between Death Korps units and conventional Imperial Guard forces typically assign siege warfare responsibilities to Death Korps regiments, while conventional units provide mobile support, rear area security, and exploitation of breakthrough opportunities. This division of responsibilities allows each unit type to operate according to their strengths while supporting overall campaign objectives. The Death Korps' willingness to accept heavy casualties in siege operations allows conventional units to preserve their strength for subsequent operations, requiring mobility and rapid deployment. The coordination between Death Korps regiments and Space Marine chapters presents unique challenges due to the fundamental differences in tactical doctrine and operational tempo between these force types. Space Marines typically favor rapid assault operations that achieve decisive results through superior firepower and shock action, while Death Korps units excel in prolonged attritional warfare that gradually reduces enemy capabilities through sustained pressure. Successful integration requires careful planning to ensure that each force type operates in roles that maximize their effectiveness. Death Korps support for Space Marine operations typically involves the reduction of fortified positions that would prove costly for Space Marines to assault directly, allowing the elite forces to concentrate on objectives that require their unique capabilities. The Death Korps' expertise in siege warfare can create breakthrough opportunities that Space Marines can exploit through rapid advances into enemy rear areas. This complementary relationship maximizes the effectiveness of both force types while minimizing casualties among irreplaceable Space Marine personnel. The command structure within Death Korps regiments emphasizes tactical competence and operational experience over political considerations or social background. Officers advance through demonstrated performance in siege warfare operations, with promotion decisions based on their ability to achieve tactical objectives while effectively managing personnel and resources under combat conditions. This merit-based advancement system ensures that Death Korps units maintain high standards of tactical competence while preserving the institutional knowledge necessary for effective siege warfare operations. Death Korps regimental commanders typically possess extensive experience in siege warfare gained through service in multiple campaigns across different theaters of operation. These officers understand both the tactical requirements of siege operations and the unique characteristics of Death Korps personnel that must be considered when planning complex operations. Their experience allows them to coordinate effectively with conventional Imperial Guard commanders while maintaining the specialized operational methods that define Death Korps effectiveness. The staff organization within Death Korps regimental headquarters incorporates specialized positions that reflect the unique requirements of siege warfare operations. Intelligence officers focus on analyzing enemy defensive capabilities and identifying vulnerable points in fortification systems, while operations officers coordinate complex multi-unit attacks that may continue for weeks or months. Logistics officers manage the enormous ammunition and supply requirements associated with sustained siege operations, ensuring that units maintain combat effectiveness throughout extended campaigns. The distinctive arsenal employed by the Death Korps of Krieg reflects both their origins as survivors of a nuclear holocaust and their specialization in siege warfare operations that demand specific equipment configurations. The regiment's weapons and equipment represent a careful balance between proven Imperial Guard technology and specialized modifications developed through decades of combat experience in the galaxy's most challenging siege environments. Every piece of equipment carried by Death Korps personnel serves multiple functions while maintaining the reliability necessary for sustained operations in contaminated or hostile conditions. The Lucius pattern lasgun serves as the primary infantry weapon for Death Korps forces, chosen for its exceptional reliability and ease of maintenance under adverse conditions. This weapon configuration features enhanced barrel cooling systems that prevent overheating during sustained firefights, while the reinforced stock and receiver assembly withstand the impacts and environmental stresses common in siege warfare. The Lucius pattern's power cell compartment incorporates additional sealing to prevent contamination from radioactive particles or chemical agents, ensuring continued operation in environments that would disable less robust weapon systems. Death Korps lasguns receive specialized modifications that reflect the regiment's operational requirements and combat experience. The standard issue weapons feature enlarged trigger guards that accommodate the thick gloves worn with Death Korps protective equipment, while the charging handles are extended to allow operation by personnel wearing full environmental protection gear. The iron sights are reinforced and simplified to maintain accuracy, even after exposure to blast effects or debris impacts that would damage more delicate optical systems. The bayonet lugs on Death Korps lasguns accommodate specialized entrenching tools that serve dual functions as digging implements and close combat weapons. These tools feature reinforced steel construction with serrated edges designed for cutting through wire obstacles, wooden fortifications, and enemy equipment. The entrenching tool's compact design allows it to be carried alongside standard combat equipment without interfering with movement or weapon handling, while its robust construction ensures effectiveness as both a utility tool and emergency weapon. Death Korps special weapon selections emphasize effectiveness against fortified positions and enemy personnel in confined spaces typical of siege warfare environments. Flamer units carry standard Imperial pattern flame weapons with enhanced fuel capacity and improved nozzle designs that provide better flame pattern control in underground or enclosed spaces. The fuel mixture used by Death Korps flamers incorporates additives that increase burning temperature and adhesion properties, ensuring maximum effectiveness against bunker positions and tunnel systems. Meltagun allocations within Death Korps units prioritize anti-armor capabilities and bunker-busting operations rather than general-purpose applications. These weapons receive specialized targeting equipment that improves accuracy against small apertures in fortified positions, allowing operators to engage firing ports and observation slits with precision shots that neutralize defensive positions without requiring direct assault. The Meltagun's ability to cut through reinforced barriers makes it invaluable for creating breaching points in enemy fortifications. Plasma guns employed by Death Korps specialists feature enhanced cooling systems and reinforced containment fields that reduce the risk of catastrophic overheating during extended engagements. These modifications reflect the regiment's operational doctrine that emphasizes sustained fire rather than burst engagements, requiring weapons capable of maintaining effectiveness throughout prolonged combat operations. The plasma gun's high energy output proves particularly effective against heavily armored enemy positions and personnel wearing advanced protective equipment. The distinctive Death Korps uniform represents both practical necessity and symbolic significance within the regiment's cultural identity. The heavy greatcoat worn by all Death Korps personnel provides multiple layers of protection against environmental hazards while maintaining sufficient flexibility for combat operations. The coat's thick fabric offers resistance to shrapnel, chemical splashes, and radioactive contamination, while the reinforced shoulders and elbows withstand the abrasion common in siege warfare environments. The greatcoat's design incorporates numerous functional elements that support Death Korps operational requirements. Large internal pockets accommodate additional ammunition, medical supplies, and specialized equipment necessary for extended operations without resupply. The high collar provides neck protection while supporting the sealed connection points required for respirator systems. The coat's length protects the legs from debris and contamination while allowing unrestricted movement during combat operations. Death Korps respirators represent perhaps the most critical component of their personal equipment, reflecting both their origins on the irradiated surface of Krieg and their frequent deployment to contaminated battlefields. These devices feature multi-stage filtration systems capable of removing radioactive particles, chemical agents, and biological contaminants from inhaled air. The respirator's sealed design creates positive pressure within the breathing system, preventing the infiltration of harmful substances even when the filtration system becomes partially compromised. The respirator's construction emphasizes durability and ease of maintenance under field conditions. The filter cartridges can be replaced quickly without specialized tools, while the breathing apparatus itself withstands impacts and environmental stresses that would damage civilian or less robust military equipment. The device's integrated communication system allows clear voice transmission while maintaining the sealed environment necessary for protection against airborne hazards. The symbolic skull motifs that adorn Death Korps equipment serve both psychological and practical functions within the regiment's operational doctrine. These death's head emblems reinforce the regiment's acceptance of mortality while creating a distinctive appearance that enhances unit cohesion and esprit de corps. The skulls appear on helmet faceplates, equipment pouches, and weapon stocks, serving as constant reminders of the Death Korps' dedication to service regardless of personal survival prospects. Death Korps flak armor incorporates enhanced protection levels that reflect their frequent exposure to artillery bombardments and explosive devices during siege operations. The armor plates feature additional layers of ablative material designed to dissipate blast effects and shrapnel impacts, while the vest's coverage extends to protect vital organs and major blood vessels. The armor's modular design allows individual plates to be replaced when damaged, maintaining protection levels throughout extended campaigns. The tactical doctrine employed by Death Korps regiments emphasizes siege warfare techniques that maximize effectiveness against fortified positions, while accepting the heavy casualties inherent in such operations. This approach prioritizes methodical advancement through enemy defensive lines, using coordinated infantry assaults supported by concentrated artillery bombardments. The doctrine recognizes that siege warfare requires patience and persistence rather than rapid maneuver, accepting extended timelines to achieve decisive results. Death Korps assault tactics focus on systematic reduction of enemy defensive positions through coordinated attacks that exploit weaknesses identified through reconnaissance and artillery preparation. These operations typically begin with prolonged bombardments designed to destroy external defenses and disrupt enemy communication systems. Infantry assaults follow predetermined routes that minimize exposure to defensive fires, while providing multiple axes of attack that prevent enemy forces from concentrating their defensive efforts. The regiment's approach to trench warfare reflects their extensive experience in static defensive operations and their understanding of the psychological factors that determine success in prolonged engagements. Death Korps units construct elaborate trench systems that provide protection for personnel while facilitating the movement of supplies and reinforcements to forward positions. These defensive works incorporate lessons learned from Krieg's Civil War, including specialized techniques for underground construction and protection against artillery bombardment. Trench construction by Death Korps engineers follows standardized procedures that maximize defensive effectiveness while minimizing construction time and resource requirements. The trenches feature reinforced walls and overhead protection that withstand direct artillery hits, while communication trenches connect different defensive positions without exposing personnel to enemy observation or fire. The trench systems incorporate specialized positions for heavy weapons, command posts, and medical facilities that support sustained defensive operations. Death Korps' attritional combat strategies recognize that siege warfare often becomes a contest of endurance rather than tactical brilliance, requiring commanders to manage resources and personnel effectively throughout extended campaigns. These strategies emphasize maintaining constant pressure on enemy positions while preserving sufficient reserves to exploit breakthrough opportunities or respond to enemy counterattacks. The approach accepts heavy casualties as inevitable while ensuring that such losses contribute to achieving strategic objectives. The regiment's artillery doctrine emphasizes the concentration of firepower against specific targets rather than dispersed bombardments that achieve limited results. Death Korps artillery units coordinate their fires to achieve maximum destructive effect against enemy fortifications, using techniques that combine different ammunition types and delivery methods to overcome various defensive measures. This approach requires sophisticated fire control procedures and extensive ammunition stockpiles to maintain effectiveness throughout prolonged siege operations. Earthshaker cannon employment by Death Korps artillery units focuses on long-range bombardment missions that provide sustained fire support for infantry operations, while remaining beyond the effective range of enemy counter-battery fires. These weapons deliver high explosive shells against fortified positions, personnel concentrations, and supply installations that support enemy defensive operations. The Earthshaker's range and accuracy make it ideal for interdiction missions that disrupt enemy logistics and communication networks. The coordination between Earthshaker batteries and forward observers requires sophisticated communication procedures that ensure accurate targeting while minimizing response times for urgent fire missions. Death Korps artillery observers receive specialized training in siege warfare techniques, including methods for identifying vulnerable points in enemy fortifications and coordinating complex fire missions that combine direct and indirect fires. These observers maintain constant communication with battery commanders to provide real-time targeting updates and damage assessments. Specialized siege equipment employed by Death Korps units includes demolition charges, tunneling equipment, and fortification construction materials that support their unique operational requirements. The demolition charges feature enhanced explosive power and specialized fusing systems designed for use against reinforced concrete and steel structures typical of fortified positions. These charges can be configured for various applications, including breaching operations, tunnel warfare, and the destruction of enemy equipment and installations. Death Korps tunneling equipment enables underground warfare operations that bypass enemy surface defenses while creating opportunities for surprise attacks against fortified positions. This equipment includes specialized digging tools, tunnel support materials, and ventilation systems that allow sustained underground operations in various soil and rock conditions. The tunneling capability provides Death Korps units with tactical advantages that conventional Imperial Guard forces cannot match. The integration of heavy weapons within Death Korps infantry units reflects their specialization in assault operations against prepared defensive positions. Heavy bolter teams provide sustained suppressive fire that allows assault troops to approach enemy positions while reducing the effectiveness of defensive fires. These weapons feature enhanced ammunition capacity and improved cooling systems that maintain effectiveness during prolonged engagements typical of siege warfare operations. Autocannon teams within Death Korps units specialize in engaging light vehicles and fortified positions that resist small arms fire, but lack the armor protection necessary to withstand dedicated anti-tank weapons. These weapons provide intermediate firepower that bridges the gap between small arms and heavy anti-tank systems, offering tactical flexibility for commanders facing diverse target sets. The autocannon's rapid rate of fire and armor-penetrating ammunition make it particularly effective against enemy fighting vehicles and lightly armored positions. Missile launcher teams equipped with crack and frag missiles provide Death Korps units with precision fire support capabilities that complement their heavy weapon systems. The crack missiles prove effective against armored targets and reinforced bunkers, while frag missiles provide area effect weapons suitable for engaging personnel concentrations and unarmored vehicles. The missile system's portability allows them to be repositioned quickly to engage targets of opportunity or respond to changing tactical situations. The logistics requirements for Death Korps operations reflect both their specialized equipment needs and their acceptance of high ammunition consumption rates during siege warfare. Supply chains must accommodate the enormous quantities of artillery shells, small arms ammunition, and specialized equipment necessary to sustain prolonged siege operations. These requirements often exceed those of conventional Imperial Guard units by factors of 3 to 5, requiring dedicated logistics assets and careful planning to maintain operational effectiveness. Death Korps medical doctrine emphasizes rapid treatment of combat casualties while maintaining the unit's combat effectiveness during ongoing operations. Medical personnel receive specialized training in treating wounds typical of siege warfare, including blast injuries, shrapnel wounds, and exposure to chemical or radioactive contamination. The medical procedures prioritize returning personnel to duty rather than comprehensive treatment, reflecting the regiment's operational priorities and resource constraints. The maintenance requirements for Death Korps equipment reflect both the harsh conditions of siege warfare and the regiment's emphasis on equipment reliability over advanced capabilities. Maintenance procedures focus on preventing equipment failures rather than optimizing performance, using robust construction and simplified systems that can be repaired under field conditions. This approach ensures that Death Korps units maintain combat effectiveness throughout extended campaigns where sophisticated repair facilities may be unavailable. The psychological conditioning that transforms ordinary human beings into Death Korps soldiers begins in the underground hive cities of Krieg, where children grow up surrounded by the constant reminder of their world's radioactive devastation. From their earliest memories, these future guardsmen understand that their existence represents a temporary reprieve from the death that claimed billions of their ancestors. The educational systems within the deep bunkers emphasize collective guilt for Krieg's fall to heresy, teaching each generation that they bear responsibility for their forebears' betrayal of the Emperor's trust. This inherited shame becomes the foundation upon which the Death Korps builds its distinctive culture of redemptive sacrifice. The indoctrination process extends far beyond simple military training, encompassing every aspect of daily life within Krieg's underground settlements. Children learn to recite litanies of penitence before they master basic literacy, while their play activities revolve around mock battles where martyrdom for the Emperor represents the highest achievement. The constant presence of death imagery throughout their environment reinforces the message that individual survival holds no value compared to service to the Imperium. Skull motifs appear on everything from eating utensils to sleeping quarters, serving as perpetual reminders that death awaits all servants of the Emperor, and that accepting this fate represents the path to redemption. The concept of inherited guilt permeates every aspect of Death Korps culture, creating a collective mindset that views their entire world as fundamentally tainted by the sins of previous generations. The historical records preserved in Krieg's archives detail the planet's fall to chaos corruption with meticulous precision, ensuring that no citizen can claim ignorance of their ancestors' failures. These accounts describe not only the political and military aspects of the rebellion, but also the moral compromises and spiritual weaknesses that allowed heretical influences to take root among Krieg's ruling classes. Each Death Korps soldier carries this knowledge as a personal burden, understanding that their service represents an attempt to atone for crimes they did not commit, but for which they nonetheless bear collective responsibility. The religious practices of the Death Korps reflect their unique relationship with mortality and their understanding of death as both punishment and salvation. Daily prayer sessions within the underground cities focus on themes of penitence and sacrifice, with congregants reciting lengthy passages that detail the consequences of betraying the Emperor's trust. These services take place in chambers decorated with murals depicting Krieg's nuclear devastation, serving as visual reminders of the price of heresy. The prayers themselves emphasize the temporary nature of mortal existence and the eternal significance of service to the Emperor, reinforcing the message that individual lives possess value only insofar as they contribute to the greater glory of the Imperium. The Death Korps' interpretation of Imperial doctrine places particular emphasis on the redemptive power of sacrifice in battle. Their theological understanding teaches that each act of courage under fire, each willing acceptance of death in the Emperor's service, helps to wash away a portion of Krieg's collective guilt. This belief system creates a culture where soldiers actively seek opportunities to demonstrate their devotion through increasingly dangerous missions, viewing survival as potential evidence of insufficient dedication rather than divine favor. The most respected veterans are those who have repeatedly placed themselves in mortal danger while achieving tactical objectives, their scars and injuries serving as visible proof of their commitment to redemption. The anonymity maintained through constant wear of respirators serves multiple functions within Death Korps culture beyond simple protection from environmental hazards. The concealment of individual features reinforces the collective nature of their service, emphasizing that personal identity matters less than unit cohesion and shared purpose. Death Korps soldiers rarely remove their breathing apparatus in the presence of others, creating a culture where individual personality traits and physical characteristics become irrelevant to social interactions. This anonymity extends to their military records, where personnel are often identified by numerical designations rather than names, further reinforcing the message that individual identity represents a luxury that servants of the Emperor cannot afford. The suppression of individual identity within Death Korps units creates a unique form of military brotherhood that differs significantly from the camaraderie found in conventional Imperial Guard regiments. Soldiers form bonds based on shared experiences and mutual dependence rather than personal relationships, creating unit cohesion that survives the loss of individual members without significant disruption to morale or effectiveness. The constant presence of death in their ranks means that Death Korps soldiers must be prepared to continue their duties regardless of which specific individuals remain alive to carry them out. This psychological preparation begins during their earliest training and continues throughout their service careers. The Death Korps' approach to military hierarchy reflects their cultural emphasis on collective responsibility and shared guilt. Officers and enlisted personnel alike understand that their ranks represent functional distinctions rather than indicators of personal worth or social status. Command authority derives from tactical competence and experience rather than birthright or political connections, with promotion decisions based entirely on demonstrated ability to achieve military objectives while effectively managing personnel under combat conditions. This merit-based system ensures that Death Korps units maintain high standards of tactical proficiency while preserving the egalitarian ethos that defines their cultural identity. The training regimens employed in Death Korps facilities emphasize endurance and pain tolerance over individual skill development, reflecting their operational doctrine that values persistence over brilliance. Recruits undergo conditioning exercises designed to build resistance to physical discomfort and psychological stress, preparing them for the prolonged hardships associated with siege warfare operations. These training programs include exposure to simulated combat conditions that replicate the environmental hazards and tactical challenges they will face during actual deployments. The graduation ceremonies for completed training cycles focus on collective achievement rather than individual accomplishment, with successful recruits inducted into the Death Korps through rituals that emphasize their transformation from individuals into components of a greater military organism. The Death Korps' understanding of honor differs fundamentally from concepts prevalent in other Imperial Guard regiments, focusing on collective achievement rather than personal glory. Individual acts of heroism receive recognition only when they contribute to unit success, while personal survival in situations where comrades have died may be viewed with suspicion rather than relief. This cultural framework creates an environment where soldiers compete to demonstrate their willingness to sacrifice for their comrades and their mission, leading to tactical approaches that prioritize objective completion over casualty minimization. The most honored Death Korps veterans are those who have repeatedly led successful operations despite suffering heavy losses, their ability to achieve results regardless of cost marking them as exemplars of proper devotion to duty. The social customs within Death Korps communities emphasize collective responsibility and shared hardship over individual comfort or personal relationships. Living quarters in the underground cities are Spartan and functional, with minimal personal possessions and standardized furnishings that reinforce the temporary nature of individual existence. Meals are communal affairs, where conversation focuses on military topics and religious instruction rather than personal interests or individual concerns. Recreation activities center around physical conditioning and weapons training, with little time or resources devoted to entertainment that does not directly support military preparedness. The Death Korps' approach to family relationships reflects their cultural emphasis on collective identity and service to the Emperor above personal bonds. Children are raised communally within educational facilities that emphasize military training and religious indoctrination over individual development or family connections. Parents maintain contact with their offspring, but understand that their primary loyalty must be to the Emperor rather than to personal relationships. This system ensures that Death Korps soldiers can accept deployment orders without concern for family obligations, while also guaranteeing that future generations will receive proper conditioning for military service. The medical practices within Death Korps communities focus on maintaining combat effectiveness rather than individual health or comfort. Treatment protocols prioritize rapid return to duty over comprehensive healing, with medical personnel trained to make triage decisions based on tactical utility rather than humanitarian concerns. Pain management techniques emphasize mental conditioning and acceptance rather than pharmaceutical intervention, reflecting the cultural belief that suffering serves as both punishment for inherited guilt and preparation for future hardships. The medical facilities themselves are designed to accommodate large numbers of casualties while maintaining operational security and unit cohesion. The Death Korps' relationship with death extends beyond simple acceptance to active embrace of mortality as a means of achieving spiritual redemption. Their cultural understanding teaches that each soldier's death in service to the Emperor helps to balance the cosmic debt created by Krieg's fall to heresy. This belief system creates a psychological framework where survival becomes secondary to demonstrating proper devotion, leading to tactical decisions that might appear reckless to outside observers, but represent logical choices within the Death Korps worldview. The regiment's willingness to accept casualties that would be considered catastrophic by conventional standards reflects not callous disregard for human life, but rather a sophisticated theological understanding of death's role in achieving collective salvation. The commemoration of fallen Death Korps personnel follows rituals that emphasize their contribution to collective redemption rather than individual achievement or personal loss. Memorial services focus on the tactical objectives achieved through their sacrifice, with detailed recitations of mission accomplishments and strategic outcomes rather than personal eulogies or emotional expressions of grief. The names of the dead are recorded in regimental chronicles that document their role in advancing the Emperor's cause, but these records emphasize unit actions rather than individual heroics. This approach to memorializing the fallen reinforces the cultural message that personal identity matters less than collective service. The Death Korps' understanding of victory differs from conventional military definitions, focusing on the demonstration of proper devotion rather than simple tactical success. Operations that achieve their objectives while suffering minimal casualties may be viewed as less significant than missions that require enormous sacrifices to accomplish similar goals. This perspective reflects their belief that redemption requires suffering and that easy victories provide insufficient opportunity to demonstrate proper penitence for their world's historical sins. The most celebrated Death Korps operations are those that combine tactical success with heavy casualties, proving both military competence and spiritual dedication. The integration of Death Korps personnel with conventional Imperial Guard forces requires careful management due to their distinctive cultural attitudes and operational methods. Other Imperial Guard regiments often struggle to understand the Death Korps' willingness to accept casualties and their apparent indifference to personal survival, leading to misunderstandings about tactical priorities and strategic objectives. Death Korps commanders must balance their regiment's cultural imperatives with the operational requirements of joint operations, ensuring that their units contribute effectively to broader military campaigns while maintaining their distinctive identity and operational methods. The Death Korps' approach to equipment maintenance reflects their cultural emphasis on functionality over aesthetics and their acceptance of harsh conditions as normal rather than exceptional. Personal weapons and equipment receive meticulous care to ensure operational reliability, but cosmetic concerns receive little attention. The utilitarian appearance of Death Korps gear reinforces their cultural message that individual comfort and appearance matter less than mission accomplishment. This practical approach to equipment management ensures that Death Korps units maintain high levels of combat readiness despite operating in environments that would degrade the effectiveness of less robust equipment configurations. The Death Korps of Krieg has earned its reputation as the Imperium's premier siege warfare specialists through participation in dozens of major campaigns across the galaxy, each deployment adding new battle honors to regimental standards while demonstrating their unique capabilities in the most challenging combat environments. Beyond the legendary 17-year siege of Vrax that defined their tactical doctrine and strategic value, Death Korps regiments have served with distinction in conflicts ranging from urban warfare in massive hive cities to the reduction of fortress worlds that had resisted Imperial authority for centuries. Their willingness to accept casualties that would cripple conventional Imperial Guard units has made them the preferred choice for operations where victory requires sustained combat effectiveness despite enormous losses. The Siege of Mordian Tertius represented one of the Death Korps' most challenging deployments, requiring them to adapt their traditional siege warfare techniques to urban combat within a functioning hive city, where civilian populations remained trapped among enemy defensive positions. The heretical PDF forces that had seized control of the hive's upper levels employed human shields and civilian infrastructure to complicate Imperial assault operations, creating tactical challenges that demanded precision rather than the overwhelming firepower typically employed by Death Korps units. The 47th Death Korps Infantry Regiment spent 14 months fighting through the hive's residential sectors, clearing enemy positions floor by floor while minimizing civilian casualties through careful application of specialized urban warfare techniques. The Death Korps' approach to urban combat demonstrated their tactical flexibility and professional competence beyond their reputation for accepting heavy casualties. Combat engineers developed specialized breaching techniques that could penetrate reinforced HAB block walls without causing structural collapses that would endanger civilian populations in adjacent areas. Infantry squads adapted their standard assault tactics to account for the three-dimensional nature of Hive City combat, using vertical movement through ventilation systems and maintenance shafts to bypass enemy strong points while avoiding civilian areas. The regiment's success in Morty and Tertius proved that their capabilities extended far beyond simple siege warfare, establishing their value for complex urban operations that required both tactical sophistication and operational endurance. The battle honors earned through these diverse campaigns reflect the Death Korps' consistent performance across different combat environments and against various enemy types. Each successful deployment adds new tactical knowledge to the regiment's institutional memory while demonstrating their value to Imperial commanders facing challenging siege warfare requirements. The Death Korps' reputation for mission accomplishment regardless of cost has made them the preferred choice for operations where conventional Imperial Guard units might fail due to casualty constraints or tactical limitations. The recruitment and training infrastructure on Krieg operates as a perpetual machine of military production, drawing from the planet's irradiated population to maintain the steady flow of new regiments demanded by the Imperium's endless conflicts. The underground hive cities that shelter Krieg's surviving population serve dual functions as both civilian settlements and military training facilities, where every citizen understands that their ultimate purpose involves service in the Death Korps. The radioactive environment that continues to contaminate the planet's surface ensures that only the hardiest individuals survive to adulthood, creating a natural selection process that produces recruits already adapted to the harsh conditions they will face during military service. The training facilities carved into Krieg's bedrock accommodate hundreds of thousands of recruits simultaneously, their vast chambers echoing with the sounds of drill sergeants shouting orders and the rhythmic marching of formation exercises. These underground complexes feature shooting ranges that extend for kilometers through natural caverns, allowing recruits to practice marksmanship at distances that replicate battlefield conditions. The obstacle courses constructed within abandoned mining tunnels incorporate radioactive hazards and chemical contamination that prepare trainees for the environmental challenges they will encounter during actual deployments. Medical facilities throughout the training complexes treat injuries that would be considered serious in civilian populations, but represent routine training accidents within Death Korps standards. The psychological conditioning that transforms Krieg citizens into Death Korps soldiers begins in childhood and intensifies throughout the formal training process. Recruits learn to suppress individual survival instincts while developing the collective mindset necessary for siege warfare operations that may continue for years without resolution. The training regimen emphasizes endurance over individual skill, with exercises designed to build mental resilience rather than physical prowess. Instructors drawn from veteran Death Korps personnel share their combat experience while reinforcing the cultural values that define the regiment's distinctive approach to warfare. The equipment production facilities on Krieg manufacture the specialized gear required by Death Korps regiments while training recruits in maintenance procedures that will keep their weapons functional during extended campaigns. The underground factories produce the distinctive respirators, reinforced flak armor, and modified lasguns that define Death Korps equipment standards. These manufacturing operations employ many of the same citizens who will eventually serve in the regiments, creating familiarity with equipment specifications and maintenance requirements that proves valuable during military service. The quality control standards enforced in these facilities reflect the understanding that equipment failures during combat operations result in mission failure and unnecessary casualties. The graduation ceremonies that mark the completion of Death Korps training emphasize collective achievement rather than individual accomplishment, with successful recruits receiving their regimental assignments through rituals that reinforce their transformation from civilians into soldiers. These ceremonies take place in vast chambers decorated with murals depicting Krieg's nuclear devastation and the subsequent redemption achieved through military service. The newly trained soldiers receive their respirators and equipment in formal presentations that emphasize the sacred nature of their duty to the Emperor. Veterans from active regiments attend these ceremonies to welcome new soldiers while sharing wisdom gained through combat experience. The reputation of the Death Korps throughout the Imperial Guard reflects both admiration for their tactical effectiveness and concern about their operational methods. Conventional Imperial Guard commanders appreciate the Death Korps' reliability in achieving assigned objectives regardless of cost, while questioning their apparent disregard for casualty minimization and resource conservation. The regiment's willingness to accept losses that would cripple other units makes them valuable for operations where conventional forces might fail, but their methods create challenges for joint operations that require coordination between different tactical approaches. The Adeptus Militarum classifies Death Korps regiments as specialist siege warfare units, recognizing their unique capabilities while acknowledging the limitations that their operational methods impose on deployment options. Supply officers appreciate the regiment's minimal logistical requirements compared to mechanized units, while medical personnel prepare for casualty rates that exceed normal expectations for Imperial Guard operations. The administrative burden of managing Death Korps deployments includes specialized procedures for replacement personnel and equipment that account for their higher consumption rates during extended campaigns. Space Marine chapters that have operated alongside Death Korps regiments generally express professional respect for their tactical competence and dedication to mission accomplishment. The Ultramarines have commended Death Korps units for their adherence to proper military procedure and their understanding of siege warfare principles that complement Space Marine assault tactics. The Imperial Fists particularly value Death Korps' expertise in defensive operations, recognizing their ability to hold fortified positions against overwhelming enemy forces through sheer determination and tactical skill. However, some chapters express concern about the Death Korps' apparent eagerness for martyrdom, viewing their attitude toward death as potentially wasteful of valuable military resources. The Adeptus Mechanicus maintains positive relationships with Death Korps regiments due to their careful maintenance of equipment and their respect for machine spirits. Tech priests appreciate the regiment's practical approach to technology that emphasizes reliability over advanced capabilities, while their experience with radioactive environments makes them valuable partners for operations on Forge worlds threatened by contamination. The Death Korps' willingness to operate in hazardous conditions allows Mechanicus forces to focus on protecting critical manufacturing facilities while the Guard units handle frontline combat operations. Current Death Korps deployments span multiple sectors throughout the galaxy, with regiments engaged in siege operations, defensive campaigns, and urban warfare missions that utilize their specialized capabilities. The 45th Death Korps Infantry Regiment currently participates in the Siege of Hive Primus on the industrial world of Mordian Quintus, where heretical PDF forces have established defensive positions within the Hive's manufacturing sectors. The regiment's expertise in urban warfare has proven essential for clearing enemy positions while preserving the industrial infrastructure necessary for continued Imperial production operations. The 127th Death Korps Infantry Regiment serves alongside Cadian shock troops in the ongoing defense of the fortress world Kasser Pardox, where Chaos Space Marine raiders continue to probe Imperial defensive lines through infiltration tactics and surprise assaults. The Death Korps units occupy the most dangerous sectors of the defensive perimeter, their willingness to fight to the death providing security for critical installations, while allowing Cadian forces to maintain mobile reserves for counterattack operations. The collaboration between these regiments demonstrates the value of combining Death Korps persistence with conventional Imperial Guard flexibility. The 203rd Death Korps Armored Regiment currently supports operations on the Forge World Metallica, where their Limun Rus battle tanks provide fire support for Skitarii formations defending against Orc incursions. The regiment's armored vehicles have been modified with enhanced filtration systems that allow operation in the Forge World's contaminated atmosphere, while their crew's experience with environmental hazards makes them ideal for supporting Mechanicus forces in industrial combat zones. The successful integration of Death Korps armor with Adeptus Mechanicus infantry demonstrates their adaptability beyond traditional siege warfare roles. The war against Chaos forces represents the Death Korps' most significant ongoing commitment, with multiple regiments deployed to combat zones where heretical forces threaten Imperial territory. The 78th Death Korps Infantry Regiment participates in the cleansing operations on the former hive world Tertius, where chaos corruption has transformed the planet's population into mutant hordes that must be eliminated through systematic extermination campaigns. The regiment's experience with contaminated environments and their psychological conditioning against horror make them particularly effective against enemies that would break the morale of conventional Imperial Guard units. The ongoing conflict against Orc wags throughout the galaxy provides numerous deployment opportunities for Death Korps regiments whose siege warfare expertise proves valuable against Orc fortress positions and defensive installations. The 156th Death Korps Infantry Regiment currently operates on the industrial world Armageddon Tertius, where their artillery units provide fire support for Steel Legion armored formations while conducting independent operations against Orc strongholds. The Death Korps' willingness to engage in prolonged attritional warfare suits them perfectly for operations against Orc forces that possess superior numbers but lack tactical sophistication. The Tyranid threat in the Eastern Fringe has created deployment opportunities for Death Korps regiments, whose defensive expertise proves valuable in establishing killing zones that can channel Tyranid assault forces into predetermined positions. The 92nd Death Korps Infantry Regiment serves on the Hive World Mukraga's honor, where their trench networks and defensive positions support Ultramarines' operations against Tyranid splinter fleets. The regiment's acceptance of heavy casualties allows them to maintain defensive lines even when facing overwhelming numbers of enemy creatures, buying time for Space Marine forces to execute decisive counterattacks. The Dark Eldar raids that plague Imperial shipping lanes and frontier worlds require rapid response capabilities that challenge Death Korps' tactical doctrine, but several regiments have adapted their methods to address these threats. The 67th Death Korps Infantry Regiment operates from the Fortress World Vigilance Gate, where their defensive positions protect critical supply depots against Dark Eldar slave raids. The regiment's experience with underground warfare has proven valuable in defending against enemies who utilize webway portals and surprise assault tactics that bypass conventional defensive measures. The enduring nature of Krieg's atonement reflects the planet's understanding that their redemption requires not merely military service, but sustained excellence in the Emperor's cause throughout generations of continued sacrifice. The cultural framework that defines Death Korps' identity emphasizes that each successful campaign represents only a small step toward balancing the cosmic debt created by their world's fall to heresy. This perspective ensures that Death Korps regiments maintain their distinctive character and operational methods regardless of their tactical successes or strategic achievements. The perpetual cycle of sacrifice that defines Death Korps' existence extends beyond individual military service to encompass the entire planet's purpose within the Imperium. Krieg's continued existence serves as both punishment for past sins and opportunity for redemption through military excellence, creating a cultural dynamic that ensures the planet will continue producing Death Korps regiments for millennia to come. The radioactive environment that makes normal human habitation impossible serves as a constant reminder of the consequences of betraying the Emperor's trust, while also creating the harsh conditions necessary to forge soldiers capable of the ultimate sacrifice. The institutional memory preserved within Death Korps training facilities ensures that tactical knowledge gained through combat experience continues to benefit future generations of soldiers. Veteran instructors share lessons learned during major campaigns while adapting training procedures to address new threats and tactical challenges encountered across the galaxy. The regimental archives maintained on Krieg document every significant engagement fought by Death Korps units, creating a comprehensive database of siege warfare techniques and tactical innovations that enhances their effectiveness in future operations. The Death Korps of Krieg stands as the Imperium's ultimate expression of redemption through service, their regiments serving as living monuments to the power of faith and sacrifice in the Emperor's cause. Their continued deployment across the galaxy's most dangerous battlefields demonstrates that even worlds touched by heresy can achieve redemption through unwavering dedication to Imperial values and willingness to pay any price for victory. In the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, where there is only war, the Death Korps embodies the Imperium's fundamental truth that survival requires constant vigilance, and that freedom's price must be paid in blood by those willing to sacrifice everything for humanity's future. Their legacy continues to grow with each campaign, each siege, and each life willingly given in service to the God Emperor of mankind.